a devoted mother working to carve out a new life,
She's very religious, believes in family.
She would help anyone.
is murdered in her own home.
She had clearly been under attack when she reached for the phone.
It was devastating.
Detectives follow the evidence down a twisted path.
Who was this person?
He's giving envelopes of money to Monica.
In her mind, they were going to be married until death do them part.
After a number of suspects emerge,
They jokingly referred to themselves as the Orange Shorts Society.
He cried, but it was very fake.
Monica told me if anything ever happens to me, that he was responsible.
the killer is someone no one could have predicted.
The whole thing was just surreal.
And I'm like, oh my God, you almost got away with it.
Glenville, Pennsylvania. It's a small, proud community where everyone knows their neighbor by name.
It wasn't really even a town, it was rural. Good, decent people. You could just keep the doors open on warm days, sitting on the porch and just relaxing and enjoying the peace.
It's a rural area in central Pennsylvania, so it's not typical for a violent crime to occur, and if it does occur, it's an abnormality.
On a spring afternoon in 2010, that peaceful atmosphere is interrupted when dispatchers at York County Control get a mysterious call.
Someone had dialed 911,
911.
and no one was saying anything.
Hello?
The dispatcher that received the call was inquiring, hello, is anyone there? So the protocol at the time was to hang up and call it back. They received a busy signal, so the phone was off the hook. They dispatched Southwestern Regional Police. A patrolman entered the residence and announced himself that he was with law enforcement. And as he made a right into the living room area, he discovered the body. There was a lot of blood around her head, as well as on the floor.
A forensics team arrives within minutes, with 2 homicide detectives following close behind.
The victim was found lying in almost like a fetal position.
They find the victim's driver's license, which identifies her as 55-year-old Monica Schmeier. Closer inspection of the body reveals she met a violent end.
She had clearly been under attack when she reached for the phone to try to call for help.
There was a telephone with the receiver off just above her body, lying there, and there was some blood on the 9 and the 1 of the telephone.
Very close to Monica's body, detectives find an important piece of evidence.
We located a small shell casing that was lying on the ground. We searched for a firearm or ammunition, a holster, anything that would lead us to believe that there would have been a gun in the house. There was none located.
The forensics team pores over the crime scene, hoping to turn up something that can help them understand the crime.
We did fingerprinting, we did photography, we searched around the house. There was nothing there to lead us to believe that it was a home invasion, and it was very mysterious to us as far as, what happened here.
Another detail suggests Monica wasn't the victim of a robbery gone wrong.
We did locate some cash in the home that were in white envelopes that were on the bookshelf. We found cash in bins that were packed up that you could visibly see as you walked around the house.
The envelopes we found were very easy to see. Some of them would have maybe $100 in them. Some of them only had a few dollars. Each one of them had a designation on the envelope, like to the church or for a bill or something like that.
Investigators begin collecting forensic evidence for further analysis.
The evidence we collected in the home consisted of the money envelopes, the blood evidence, scrapings from the phone, from the floor, and fingerprints. A Rolodex was found. On the Rolodex, we found some close contact information.
While forensics continue their work at the scene, detectives track down Monica's family to deliver the terrible news.
Monica had 2 adult daughters, Veronica and Elsa, and they were not living at home at the time of her killing. Veronica was in Florida, and Elsa was out of the country.
Both daughters are stunned by the murder and say that their mother was known for her charity, which had only increased since their parents' divorce.
Monica Schmeier's daughters said that she would help anyone, extremely generous, volunteered her time in the community, was a devout Catholic, very involved in her church.
Monica's brother, Eric, is no less shocked when police inform him of his sister's murder.
It was April 1st, which is April Fool's Day. You know, I'm thinking is this a prank? You know, what, my sister's been killed? It was devastating. Monica was not only my sister, she was my next door neighbor.
Detectives ask Eric to tell them more about his sister, in the hope that something from her past will point them toward her killer.
We were raised in a Catholic family in northern New Jersey. We had a simple, frugal life, 5 siblings. I was the eldest and she was the 4th. She was the smartest out of all 5 of us. Monica was very studious and very determined. Even when she was a little kid, she was a bookworm. She aced everything through college, grammar school, high school. Monica studied like crazy and went to medical school. She was going to do her internship. She was starting it in New York City.
As Monica was chasing her dreams, her life took an unexpected turn.
She met John Schmeier, and they fell in love. She became pregnant, and that was a surprise to both of them.
The young couple got married in 1981 and began building a happy life together.
Monica became a mother, and she felt that she had really found her niche. And she just loved being a mother. John, he went and got his degrees, and he became an ophthalmologist and was offered a position in Hanover, Pennsylvania. They asked me to come along and be the office manager.
With John busy at work, Monica focused on motherhood and let her own career go by the wayside.
She was supposed to do her internship, then she got pregnant again. I don't know how expected that was, but she loved it. Her focus became being a mother. She was dedicated to John and her 2 daughters. A nice wooden house with 60 acres. That's what she wanted more than anything. John gave that to her.
Over the years, John's career thrived, but the couple's marriage began to suffer. In 2003, after 22 years of marriage, he asked Monica for a divorce.
She was devastated. She was so much in love with John. She's very religious, believes in family, you know, so she didn't want to agree to divorce. She got suicidal and she went into a depression. All she did was just cry, and you could see how miserable she felt. I was worried about Monica, but I felt if Monica needed any help, I was right down the street.
Finally, in 2008, after 5 years of resisting, Monica agreed to sign the divorce papers. Their unusual settlement agreement helps investigators understand why Monica had envelopes of cash stashed around her house.
John was paying Monica $1,700 a month in alimony. He had also given her the family home and much of their savings because it was him who wanted that divorce, not her.
There was alimony being paid, but he did so in cash, which was weird because Monica didn't have a bank account.
Monica Schmeier did not like to use banks, didn't trust them, preferred to keep the cash in her home.
But with Monica having no other source of income, John grew wary of the arrangement.
John was pissed off that he had to pay her in cash. He was upset that he had to pay her bills for her. He paid for everything.
Could John's resentment have grown so great he wanted Monica dead? When detectives ask Eric, his answer is shocking.
Monica told me if anything ever happens to me, John is responsible because she was scared that John would do something to hurt her.
Coming up, does a grieving spouse have something to hide?
He cried, but there were no tears. It was very fake.
A surprising lead sends the case in a new direction.
What struck me most is how utterly random it was.
And the truth blindsides everyone.
It was like an aha moment for me. Why did you lie to me?
York County Police investigating the horrific murder of Monica Schmeier have reason to be suspicious of Monica's ex-husband, John.
We had information from Eric, Monica's brother, that Monica had stated that if anything ever happened to her, that John would be responsible for that.
Investigators quickly head over to John's house. When they tell him about Monica's murder, they're surprised by his behavior.
John reacted in a way that was very awkward and very unusual, something that in my years I had never seen. Oh my God, he put his hand across his chest.
Maybe some of it was a little fake. Maybe the clutching of the heart was a little fake.
He began to cry, would probably be a stretch. There were no tears. Myself, I do believe it was very fake. I covered his face, would look up and see if we were watching him. And as he's doing this, it's like, oh my God, this is just so weird. And it's like, is he involved?
Detectives asked John to come down to the precinct to talk.
He explained to me about this weird and unusual arrangement that he had with Monica. The envelopes that we found in the home would be labeled like electric bill, water bill, mortgage, whatever, but they were used to give back to John so that John could then pay her bills. So we're looking at this from the outside, wondering what the hell's going on, that he's paying her in cash. She is now taking cash, putting it in envelopes, giving it back to John. John's then writing a check to pay her electric bill. So it was fueling that frustration and animosity in John's perspective. He's still doing everything for Monica, even though they're not married anymore. Because being a devout Catholic, Monica didn't care they were divorced. In her mind, they were still married, and they were going to be married until death do they part.
John admits that the situation bothered him, but he says he'd never resort to murder.
He agreed. It's very frustrating. It was very much a pain for him to do all this stuff, but he couldn't. Get rid of her is for lack of a better phrase.
Anxious to prove his innocence, John provides police with an alibi.
He was able to provide us with a detailed explanation as to what he had done that day, where he was, and who he was with.
John tells the detectives he was meeting with an acquaintance named Sarah Powell before the two of them joined up with a larger group at a local restaurant.
And I asked him if he has information that can verify his alibi, and he was able to provide me with a cell phone number for Sarah Powell. We wrapped up the interviews. We advised John Schmeier to stay away from the home. We may need to go back there at some point in time just to stay out of it. We had a secure scene.
The next day, detectives speak with Sarah Powell to confirm John's alibi.
She revealed to me that, yes, I was with John Schmeier yesterday. She had been with him for lunch at a restaurant where they were discussing online trading, that John experimented with that, and he enjoyed doing it, and she was looking to get involved in it to try to make some extra money.
Sarah and her fiance knew John Schmeier from a group that met frequently at a local restaurant.
John had started meeting with a group of people at Hooters restaurant. Sometimes a few times a month, they jokingly referred to themselves as the Orange Shorts Society, or OSS.
It was a place where they would go and just hang out and, drink beer and eat wings.
After their meeting, John and Sarah had met up with the larger OSS group.
When I asked her who all was there, she was able to provide information that matched John's as far as who all was present that day.
Investigators tracked down the rest of the OSS members at the meeting, and each one of them echoes John and Sarah's story. But they also share something else about John's relationship with Monica.
At these OSS meetings, John would say that he was frustrated with her and he was trying to move on with his life, but yet Monica was always there in his business.
Even though his alibi is confirmed, John appears to have a clear motive for murder, which makes him suspicious to police. So they ask him to take a lie detector test.
John submitted to a polygraph examination. John's polygraph was inconclusive, which means that we were unable to determine whether he was being truthful or not.
The test results have police mulling over a new theory.
Well, if John has an alibi, well, then maybe there's something else going on here that we need to look into. Theoretically, what if he paid somebody to kill her? We started really looking at John as far as, a murder for hire, that theory.
There was money involved, and certainly divorces can be acrimonious. He certainly was somebody they continued to look at.
Detective suspicions about John are stoked yet again when they get a troubling call from Monica's brother, Eric.
I told them that John comes to the door at about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And then John went into explaining that he went to Monica's house. John was not supposed to go to the house. He was told not to go there. He went there anyway.
Now that set a bell off for us. What the hell's going on here?
Detectives are eyeing John Schmeier in the murder case of his wife, Monica, after learning that he returned to the crime scene just hours after being questioned by police.
We learned from Eric, Monica's brother, that John Schmeier disregarded what we had asked him and actually went to the scene to see what had happened and gone into the house, had looked around, had walked around.
John's behavior is not only suspicious, but could have damaged the investigation.
Anything further that we wanted to do there had been jeopardized because the scene was no longer secure at that point. With John not following our request, it's another arrow in our quiver as far as, the person of interest, just another little check mark.
The day after the murder, police canvassed the neighborhood around Monica's home.
Patrol officers went out and spoke with neighbors, were able to locate people that saw something suspicious that was out of the ordinary the afternoon of March 31st. The first witness Patrol located was Mr. Kegerice. He lives up the hill from Monica Schmeier. Mr. Kegerice advised that the afternoon of March 31st, he noticed a gentleman coming down the hill. And he said it was kind of unusual. He'd never seen the guy before that afternoon. He sees this same gentleman now walking with a purpose, is how he describes it, back up the hill with what he believes to be a white envelope in his hand. So now we're putting two to two together. Oh, white envelope. We had white envelopes in the house. Those white envelopes contained cash. Why is this guy in the middle of nowhere, then comes back, and now he has an envelope, and he's walking with a purpose? Patrol also located a second witness, Mr. Crawford, who lived a little further up the hill. And Mr. Crawford was able to tell us that he was coming up the road from the Schmeier residence, and he noticed a gentleman walking up the roadway, which was unusual because there's not a lot of foot traffic out where these guys live. And Mr. Crawford also said you can see up the hill a silver van. And he describes it as a work van. It's not a, a soccer mom van. It's just your regular panel work van. Patrol was able to locate some tire tracks in the grass where that van, you could see where it did like a three-point turn, turned around and went back up the hill. So now we have a direction of travel.
Investigators conclude the van headed towards a village called Jefferson.
In Jefferson, there's a bank. Now that bank has a camera that's facing out. So what we figured was, well, we'll get a search warrant, we'll grab the bank video, as well as an ATM for March 31st. If the suspect had made a left, he goes towards Jefferson. If he makes a right, he goes to Maryland. We have a 50-50 shot, whether or not we got this van.
Investigators keep their fingers crossed as they comb through the poor quality video.
And I looked through all this video looking for silver vans, and I was able to find numerous silver vans that were coming through and going back on that day. We were looking for a needle in a haystack. We had a van. We now had, a possible suspect. We had the white envelopes. We had, all this information, but yet we still were getting nowhere.
3 days after the murder, investigators get the autopsy report, which they hope can help shed some light on the circumstances of Monica's death.
Miss Schmeier had been murdered with a single gunshot wound to the head, right above her eye. What also was found was she had a lot of trauma to the right side of her face and her cheek and lips area, indicating that there had been a struggle.
I told them that Monica would fight. Monica had no fear. She had no fear of death. Monica did not care. She would go after the guy and scratched him. When I told the police that, they checked for DNA under their fingernails.
The fingernail scrapings, we sent them off to a forensic lab for analysis for DNA.
While they wait for the results, detectives focus on anyone Monica would have trusted to come to the house.
We had information from Eric, Monica's brother, that Monica had a handyman that would take care of things for her.
He lived a pretty good distance from her house. He would come down and did a lot of work for her, trimming trees and stuff. He did come often, and he didn't charge her for anything. It did seem suspicious to us at the time, and we kind of thought there might have been a relationship there.
Now, this handyman was married, but yet he spent a lot of time with Monica. As an investigator, you look at who normally kills you. It's someone you know, someone you have a relationship with. There's a thin line between love and hate, and that's where, our suspicions were, okay, well then maybe there's something else going on here that we need to look into.
Detectives investigating the homicide of 55-year-old Monica Schmeier have learned that Monica may have had a relationship with a handyman who did work for her around the house.
He would cut her grass, would do odd jobs around the house, take care of things for her. And she would often be seen like having lunch with him, or there was a relationship there. Now, we didn't know how strong that relationship or how intimate that relationship was.
Monica's brother, Eric, can offer investigators little insight into his sister's recent personal life.
In the beginning, we visited often, and then John left. Even though she was my next-door neighbor, she became isolated from me, and in a way, I didn't know what was going on.
Detectives asked the handyman to come down to the station for an interview.
When we asked him where he was at the time of the murder, he told the investigator that he had been working at a residence within a gated community in Adams County, about 40 miles away.
Unwilling to take him at his word, detectives check into his alibi.
We were able to substantiate that based off of the gate log as well as the video that was there that showed him coming in early in the morning and leaving after the 911 call would have been placed. So we were able to eliminate him as a possible person of interest in this investigation.
With the handyman in the clear, detectives are running out of possible suspects.
We looked at everyone. We looked at the UPS driver who delivered a package that day. We looked at the mailman. We looked at the exterminator. We looked at people that she knew from the dry cleaners. Anywhere we could find information about Mrs. Schmeier, we talked to those people because we were at wit's end as far as who could have done this and why would they have done it.
The passing weeks start to take an emotional toll on Monica's friends and family.
Everybody back home is waiting for something to happen, something. And then I got to the point, and I think the rest of the family, it's just gonna be one of those things. You know, we're just gonna, you know, the guy maybe gets away with it or whatever.
Just seemed as if they were never going to solve it. And I think people were concerned, what if it was random? Because if it was random, it can happen again.
A month into the investigation, Detective Damagon decides to take a fresh look at all the evidence they have so far.
I was sitting at my desk in my office, and I have my notepad, and I'm going through all my notes from the scene.
The investigators circle back to Monica's ex, John, and his friends at the Orange Shorts Society.
I'm flipping through my notebook, and I get to my interview with Sarah Powell. Reading that, going back through that.
Fellow Orange Shorts Society member Sarah Powell had confirmed John's alibi. But now another detail suddenly jumps out to the detective.
And immediately, a light bulb goes off, and I recall, Sarah Powell telling me my fiance is usually there, but he wasn't yesterday.
Sarah's fiance, Timothy Jacoby, is also a member of the Orange Shorts Society. But because he was unable to confirm John's alibi on the day of the murder, he had been off investigators' radar until now.
Come to find out, he has a master's degree, he's college educated, he's a U.S. Air Force veteran. He made, better than average money.
But when police search Timothy's name in their database, they make an alarming discovery.
He had a prior arrest for a robbery of a jewelry store involving a firearm.
Scooped up, I think it was close to $48,000 worth of jewelry. Turned around and ran out and dropped all the loot as he was running. They still caught him. He served prison time for that.
An ex-con who's friends with John Schmeier. The discovery reignites detectives' murder-for-hire theory.
We're lacking the nexus between Tim and Monica, and that's where the investigation kinda pivots to John Schmeier again.
Clearly he didn't do it himself, but he could have paid someone to do it.
Detectives' suspicions intensify when they check John's phone records.
In John's cell phone records, we found a phone call the day of the murder from John to Tim Jacoby. And I'm like, oh my God. It was like an aha moment for me. So all this is beginning to fit together. We had information from Eric, Monica's brother, that Monica had stated at some point in time that if anything ever happens to me, John did it. So we were looking, did John Schmeier and Tim Jacoby conspire to kill Monica Schmeier?
When police discover that John Schmeier's friend, Timothy Jacoby, is a convicted felon, they wonder if Schmeier may have commissioned him to murder his wife, Monica.
I run him for firearms, and what does he own? A Kel-Tec 32 automatic, which is one of the manufacturers we're looking for. So again, another flag goes up. You know, now we got to tie him to a van.
Was Jacoby the man witnesses saw driving the silver van close to Monica's house around the time of the murder?
But the problem we're seeing now is he doesn't own a van. We then identified where he worked, and he has access to a silver work van that they sign out on a calendar. You just go in and you check the calendar. If it's available, you put your initials in there, and on Tuesday you get the van.
Investigators asked for the company's logbook to see if Timothy had the van when Monica was killed.
We're going through it, and wouldn't you know it, there's only 11 months there. And the 1 month is missing is March. March 31st is the date of the murder. Once we found that Tim Jacoby had access to a van, we checked that bank surveillance video, and we were able to locate a van that's the same make and model as the one that Tim Jacoby had access to, coming out a route that would lead someone towards Tim's home.
The evidence piling up against Jacoby is compelling, but detectives will need something more concrete if they're to file charges.
We make the decision, we're gonna hit Tim's house with a search warrant. Tim did not say one word. Not why are you guys here, what's going on, nothing. Silence, other than a smirk on his face.
The search quickly uncovers damning evidence.
We found a firearm that had been stolen in a burglary in Florida some years before. So Tim, being a felon, he was not to possess any kind of firearm, and he was currently on parole, so we charged him with possession of a firearm as well as receiving stolen property. His parole was violated, and he was put in jail.
In addition to the stolen gun, investigators find a strange piece of evidence that leaves them scratching their heads.
In a detached shed that was on the property, we found a small barrel about, I don't know, that long, maybe 2.5 inches long. And it appeared to me that it was consistent with a .32 or a small caliber firearm barrel.
Could this barrel be part of the murder weapon? While it's sent to the lab for analysis, detectives have some questions for Jacoby. But Jacoby isn't interested in talking.
Tim invoked his right to counsel, advised that he didn't have anything to say, and that he wanted his attorney present.
While Jacoby stonewalls, detectives question his fiancée.
When we interviewed Sarah, Sarah denied any involvement to the point where she was physically upset. I then further inquired with Sarah if she'd ever seen this small black firearm that would fit in like the palm of my hand, a .32 ACP firearm to match the shell casing we found at the scene. And she said yes, that she had been with Tim when he had shot it. and she advised that it was at Tim's parents' place on a covered porch that's behind their farm, and they would shoot up towards a field.
Police quickly file a search warrant and begin scouring Tim's parents' property, starting with the house.
We found the box for a .32 ACP firearm, but we didn't find the gun. I went out back, looking in the grass, trying to find, a shell casing, something that's gonna help us. We didn't find anything.
To connect Tim to Monica's murder, detectives need to find the gun or the shell casings that match the ones found at the crime scene.
At that point, I'm standing on the decking of this porch, and I look down. The boards are spaced in a way that they're, I don't know, maybe a ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch apart. Light bulb goes off. I look at these two guys and said, did anybody go underneath? And they said, I don't think so. And I'll never forget, I'm standing there. They weren't underneath the platform for, 30 seconds. And the one officer says, are you looking for a .32? And I said, man, don't screw with me like that. And he goes, here you go. And he holds one out from underneath the porch. He goes, oh, here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. The shell casings we found at the Jacoby farm were matched up with the shell casing from the murder scene. The gun that fired the shot that killed Monica Schmeier is the same gun that fired those rounds that we found at the farm.
But before detectives could bring murder charges against him, one question was crucial to their case. Why would Tim Jacoby kill Monica Schmeier?
Police determined that he had never met Monica, had nothing against Monica, and the only way he knew her was through her husband.
To detectives, it was looking more and more like Tim didn't act alone.
John's alibi was airtight in the sense that he could not have physically committed that crime. However, that didn't clear him with police, because certainly he could have hired Tim Jacoby.
Anxious to get the truth once and for all, detectives confront the man they've suspected all along.
I went down to Virginia, where Dr. Schmeier was now residing, because we were not 100% sure that John didn't have anything to do with the homicide.
Police have strong evidence implicating Tim Jacoby in the murder of Monica Schmeier. But they suspect that Monica's ex-husband, John, may have ordered the hit.
We've identified Tim Jacoby as a suspect, but now we need a motive. Well, how does Tim Jacoby know Monica Schmeier? Because he doesn't know her, but he knows John. Did John Schmeier and Tim Jacoby conspire to kill Monica Schmeier?
John and Tim would socialize together. According to John, that's where Tim learned about Monica and the envelopes of money.
When we questioned him further, he said Tim knew that Monica would have cash at the house because that's what John told everyone. He knew that Monica lived by herself because that's what John told everyone. Tim Jacoby took that information and he devised in his mind the perfect crime.
It's a plausible motive. Still, to test the theory that John may have paid Tim to carry out the murder, detectives searched the financial records of both men.
We're trying to find any kind of financial connection between John and Tim. We left no stone unturned. We were finding nothing.
Yet detectives know that John had placed a call to Jacoby on the day of the murder.
When we inquired with John about why this phone call had been made, he related that, well, he had called Tim to let him know that he was meeting with Sarah because he didn't want Tim to think there was some kind of relationship between them or that John was trying to formulate a relationship with Sarah.
Without any evidence to implicate John in his wife's murder, detectives finally clear him as a suspect.
I believe that John, as quirky as he may be, had nothing to do with the homicide of Monica Schmeier. No one other than Tim Jacoby committed this crime.
On October 9th, 2012, Timothy Jacoby is charged with first-degree murder.
Someone she had never met that John knew. The whole thing was just surreal.
2 years later, the case goes to trial, and prosecutors lay out how they believe Monica's murder unfolded.
We believe that afternoon, Tim signed out the van in Lancaster County. He came across, parked the van, walked up to the home, whether he knocked on the door or he rushed the house, whatever, he overtook Monica, whether it was by surprise or by force. At some point, she made a run for the phone, at which point she brought the phone up to make the call, and she was shot.
Worried police are on their way, Jacoby panics.
Tim, in haste, grabs what he sees on the counter, walking with a purpose, with an envelope in his hand, and leaves.
Jacoby tries to cover his tracks by tampering with the logbook and murder weapon.
It showed that Jacoby was trying to erase every bit of evidence that might tie him to this crime.
So far, the evidence is circumstantial. So prosecutors turn to the results of a specialist YSTR DNA test.
A YSTR tests for specifically the male Y chromosome. They ran the YSTR test on the fingernail scrapings of Monica Schmeier, and they found a complete Y profile of the male Jacoby lineage. We eliminated his brothers and his father as having anything to do with it based off of alibis, other circumstantial evidence.
On October 8th, 2014, the jury finds Jacoby guilty of first-degree murder, burglary, tampering with physical evidence, and robbery.
Ultimately, Tim was sentenced to death. That's justice in my eyes.
Maybe there was a sense of relief and closure with the family, but for me, that pales in the fact that my sister's dead. I want people to remember Monica as a dedicated Catholic, someone who was dedicated to her family. I don't know anybody that was more dedicated to her family and to God. She was unbelievable.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to Oxygen.com. A hard-working New Mexico family
My dad was up at 4 in the morning, wouldn't go down till 10 o'clock at night.
She was always the type of person to just help everybody.
is murdered on Father's Day.
My parents are dead.
They were covered in so much blood.
That was the worst I've ever seen.
Police uncover a loving family
He was a shaken baby. We were told he may never walk again.
with a startling criminal connection
She has a history of burglaries.
and a jaw-dropping revelation.
I absolutely was shocked. I didn't think I have ever known anybody in my life who could do something that brutal.
To this day, I still can't understand how the person could do something this tragic, this gruesome.
They said, I know who did it. I know who did it.
El Rancho, a tiny New Mexico town home to just a few hundred families, a place filled with honest, hardworking people.
It's a very tight-knit community. It's kind of one of those places where everybody knows everybody.
On Father's Day 2011, police receive a 911 call that shatters the early evening calm.
Santa Fe 911, where's your emergency? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
I don't know. I just went there to put the answer to the phone. He come out and I walked over to check on him and I think it was in the yard.
I can't hear you when you're yelling. Try not to yell into the phone. I can't understand you.
My parents are dead.
The caller is a 35-year-old woman named Cherie Ortiz Rios. Officers arrive at the property she shares with her parents, Lloyd and Dixie Ortiz. Police enter the home occupied by Cherie's parents and her brother to investigate, starting with the master bedroom.
Dad observed a female laying face down in her nightgown attire, deceased.
The brutality that was involved was unspeakable.
She had some trauma on the right side of her temple region.
Police believe this is Cherie's 53-year-old mother, Dixie Ortiz.
As you walk out through the main door to the bedroom, there's a couple of steps up into a kitchen. That's where a deceased male was laying face down. That was probably the worst I've ever seen. There was several defects in his head and shoulder area.
Cherie tells police that this is the body of her 21-year-old brother, Stephen.
As you walk back out the room to the rear of the residence, there was another deceased male laying face down. And he had several injuries to his upper torso and his head region.
The dead man is Cherie's 58-year-old father, Lloyd. Detectives called in the medical examiner to take charge of the bodies. For now, they can only speculate about the cause and time of death.
There were limitations on how well we could examine the injuries because they were covered in so much blood.
It looked like something that had penetrated all of their bodies. So at that point, led us to believe that they were actually shot with some type of a firearm.
While the medical examiner carefully removes the bodies, a forensics team meticulously looks for evidence.
We did not find any shell casings. There wasn't a gun located. There was nothing that indicated that we had our murder weapon at the scene. We have no physical evidence as far as some type of a fingerprint. There weren't any footwear impressions in any of the blood. Maybe we can get some DNA, but we don't know that initially. That has to be sent to the lab for testing. With this type of crime scene, generally there's only a couple different types of motive. It's love, money, or anger. So we have to look into those. Lloyd's wallet was on the counter right next to where Stephen was lying in the kitchen. It had money in it. It didn't look like somebody was in there to steal from them.
There's no evidence to suggest this is a robbery, so police consider whether other motives could have been at play.
Who would stand to gain something from killing 3 people on Father's Day in their house?
Police need to learn more about the victims and their family. They turn to Cherie, who lives just steps away.
On the 2/3 of the property, Lloyd, Dixie, and their son, Stephen, lived, and the other third was occupied by Lloyd and Dixie's daughter, Cherie, her husband, Jesse, and their 2 children, Catalina and Robert.
When her sister arrives, a despondent Cherie can barely keep it together.
I remember my sister running up to me and telling me, that my mom and my dad and my brother were dead.
There were nothing I could do or say to make it better for her. 'Cause I love my sister so much, so much.
Cherie and Angela choke back tears as they tell police all about the most important people in their lives.
My mom and dad were the best parents that I could ever ask for. They were always there, always accepted us for who we were, always stood by our side. no matter what.
Lloyd was a tile contractor who was popular in the town.
My dad was amazing. Up at 4 in the morning, wouldn't go down till probably 10 o'clock at night every day.
Lloyd had been married to Dixie for 34 years. She worked in a nursing home.
She didn't even think of that as being a job. It was just who she was.
Dixie's selfless, caring manner didn't stop with her work. In 1989, when their daughters were just teens, she and Lloyd took in a baby in need.
Stephen was 7 months old when he came into our home as a foster child. He was a shaken baby. His left side of the body was paralyzed. He had cerebral palsy. We were told that he may never walk, talk.
I would grab him out of the crib and stick him right next to me in bed, and he would sleep right next to me. I just loved him so much.
As he grew, the family's love helped transform Stephen into a strong and happy little boy.
Walking, potty training, the developmental milestones, they took a lot longer for him to reach, but he reached every single one of them.
Stephen was part of our church, and he was such an absolute joy. He would greet everybody. Everybody in church loved him. He made it a point to talk to everybody. He was quite a young man.
Stephen, Lloyd, and Dixie's lives have been cut tragically short. But why would someone murder such a loving family? Police find one possible reason: growing outside.
There were several marijuana plants that were being grown. There was a fenced-off area where there was 17 plants growing.
These plants were not visible unless you were directly over them. It was a very tight oxygen area that was padlocked.
A marijuana crop under lock and key outside the family home piqued detectives' interest. Had they just uncovered an illegal drug operation?
My parents had a medical marijuana card for my brother and a grower's license. So they were legally growing medical marijuana for my brother.
My brother had 2 brain surgeries to relieve some of the pressure in his brain. And so they prescribed medical marijuana to him to help relieve the headaches he was having. They were pretty debilitating at times.
The family had known that Lloyd was growing the marijuana for Stephen, and the family would smoke some of the marijuana.
While the marijuana was being grown legally, detectives suspect that it could have attracted the attention of the wrong people.
Was this some type of a drug-related incident?
Police become even more concerned when Cherie and her husband Jesse relay a story about a few suspicious characters they heard outside their home on the night of the murder.
They indicated that they were watching a movie that ended between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning. Their dog started barking, and Jesse got up and walked to the front window. He saw a car that was parked outside.
He heard a kid yelling out there. He heard somebody say, "Hurry up, come on." And he was like, "There's somebody out there." And so he went back in and even grabbed a gun. And he got in his truck and he drove his truck toward that car.
Coming up, the autopsy reveals an unexpected cause of death.
It's not generally your weapon of choice. It's extremely violent, it's brutal.
And the town is stunned when the killer is revealed.
People were in disbelief. As a pastor, it was hard for me to even fathom.
Hours after Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen Ortiz are found dead, police are hunting for the driver of a car seen outside the home the night before the murders.
We interviewed Lloyd and Dixie's daughter, Cherie, and she said that her husband, Jesse, saw a car that was parked outside and to the left of the property. He had indicated that the vehicle was a gray car.
The dog started barking crazy. My husband, Jesse, he came out and even got in his truck.
Cherie tells police Jesse followed the vehicle in his truck. But when detectives interview Jesse, he tells them a completely different story.
In Jesse's interview, he had failed to mention that he actually left the house that evening.
You never left the house?
No.
Why would your wife say you left the house?
That I left the house?
Why would she say that?
Maybe because I was outside or something.
She said she heard you leave the house. Why would she say that?
I don't know.
It was pretty concerning that he would forget one of the biggest details of that evening with his involvement.
As detectives continue to press Jesse, he suddenly remembers details from the night before.
Jesse.
You know what? I might have left the house. When I seen the car parked. You know what? That is correct. That is correct.
You see the issue?
Yeah, I do. I forgot about that.
It's something you don't just forget about, Jesse.
Well, I'm serious, man.
Man to man. You know where I'm going.
Right.
It's time to start talking.
I do remember, because I remember going back down there to get my keys. And I did get in my truck. And I drove towards the dead end that way.
What happened then?
I passed by.
Why would you not confront somebody right there?
Because I didn't expect anything.
Jesse, lying to me, dude.
I'm not lying to you, bro. I'm telling you the truth.
Jesse's changing story now has police eyeing him as a suspect. And when they ask him about his relationship with his in-laws, they think they may have hit upon a motive.
We found out something very alarming. There was some stuff in the close past that had caused some family tension between Lloyd and Jesse. And we knew at one point Lloyd was embarrassed of the way that Cherie and Jesse's property looked, so he actually built a fence in between the two properties so he didn't have to look at it anymore. So we knew there was some tension there.
Police can't rule out that tension in the family could have boiled over. Could Jesse have slipped out of the house and committed 3 heinous murders over a minor family squabble? To get to the truth, police grilled the couple about where they were the night of the murder.
They told us the timeline of where they were. They went to a casino. They were there for X amount of time, drove to their residence. They put in a movie right away. They were able to identify almost minute for minute of what they did that entire day, which is kind of unusual.
And when police ask Cherie about finding the bodies, she tearfully gives them a detailed account of the horror that unfolded.
And I walked in and I was like, Mom. And then I walked over to her to shake her, and her head was blown. And so I ran to the kitchen to check for my brother and my dad, and I thought it was my dad laying on the floor in his underwear because his face was so blown off. And so I ran home screaming for my husband. And my husband went back and he said, honey, that's Steven in the kitchen. Your dad's dead in the backyard.
Cherie's story is plausible, but one thing she can't explain is something she told police when she called 911.
They're dead! They're out gunshot wounds to the head! They're dead! They've been dead since the morning!
Cherie said that she knew if she would have went over there, she could have saved him that morning, which told me that she had intimate knowledge of when the homicides actually occurred, which pretty concerning. How would she know that? We didn't know that timeline of when they were actually killed.
Detectives are no longer suspicious of just Jesse. Is it possible that the Ortiz's own daughter could be involved as well?
We did obtain DNA samples from Cherie and Jesse to try and analyze to see if there was anything that could be matched.
Police searched Cherie and Jesse's home, hoping to find a physical link to the murder. With so much activity in the tiny town of El Rancho, news of the crime spreads.
My wife and I raced down to the property. When we had got there, there was quite a few people there. Cherie was just outside herself. She was just hysterical.
Detectives can't help but wonder if Cherie's tears are genuine, yet they're unable to find any physical evidence to link Cherie or Jesse to the murders. When the autopsy report comes back the next day, they hope the results will help them shed some light on the mystery.
I actually did attend the autopsy, and during the course of the autopsy, the pathologist informed us that the wounds sustained were the result of impact trauma. They were killed with a pickaxe. Stephen Ortiz, the son of Lloyd and Dixie, received 17 blows to the head from the pickaxe. Evidently, the victims were beaten long after they were already deceased.
The amount of force that was used to cause this was extreme. My initial reaction was, who had this much anger to want to kill him in such a gruesome manner?
After receiving the autopsy report on a horrific triple homicide in El Rancho, New Mexico, detectives have just discovered that the Ortiz family was killed with a pickaxe. Now that police know what to look for, they quickly set out to find the murder weapon.
One of the agents remembers seeing a Maddox-style pickaxe lying in an adjacent field to the west of the residence. So we immediately went to the scene and found our pickaxe, covered in blood. Processed it to the crime scene lab in Santa Fe and waited for results.
There was a lot of hope that there was going to be potential evidence that would link the assailant to the pickaxe.
There was nothing. There was nothing there. We got DNA that was identified on the pickaxe from the 3 victims. Nobody else.
Still, the murder weapon does tell police something about the killer.
It would take a great deal of force to cause that type of injury.
Police had to consider whether either of their suspects were strong enough to commit the crime. Jesse was capable. Was Cherie? While police search for answers, the small town of El Rancho is gripped with fear.
The whole community was on high alert. This kind of crime is very unusual for that area.
All we knew was that there were 3 dead people that the community loved, and nobody knew why and how.
Police continue to look into the alibis of the main suspects, Cherie Ortiz and her husband Jesse Rios, who said they'd been to a casino that night. Investigators see if their story can be verified.
They were seen on surveillance video at a gas station, and then they went to a casino.
This supports the couple's claims. Investigators also track what they did the rest of the evening.
We were able to pinpoint the length of time that it would take to drive from the casino to their house.
The timeline puts them in their home, right next door to the murders, at the time of the crime. But it's not nearly enough evidence to pursue a case. Police hope to utilize the publicity surrounding the murders and make an appeal for tips.
Everybody wanted to say who they thought it was, but didn't have any merit behind any of the stuff they were coming forward with.
Detectives also combed through their witness interviews and hit on a name they hadn't considered before.
Initially, Angela had mentioned that Nicholas Ortiz was a 16-year-old, just a regular kid in the community. Cherie had a son that was Nicholas's age, and they went to school together.
Nick Ortiz had a positive relationship with the family. There's no relation, by the way, between Nick Ortiz and the 3 Ortizes who were victim. It's just same last name.
Nicholas's family lived right up the road from us, and that's how him and my son had become friends.
He was having some troubles at home. Eventually, my sister opened up her home to him, gave him his own room.
He would go over next door to Lloyd and Dixie's house. They would give him money. They took him to the flea market. They took him everywhere. So they basically just treated him like he was one of the family.
But the transition to family member wasn't all smooth.
My husband and I had caught Nicholas going through our drawers. We had just started noticing a little bit of money missing. Things moved. So we started giving him an allowance every week for the chores he was doing as well.
Nick's troubles extended to school, too.
Nick had come home from school and you could tell he had been punched in the face and was kind of beat up. I freaked out. Oh my God, who did this to you? He said, I joined a gang with some friends of mine and I had to let them beat me up. And I was like, okay, so now today we're gonna have the anti-gang talk. And I mean, we did.
The family tells police that joining a gang was just one example of the problems Nick brought to their home.
One night, my father had asked my son to cut down a plum tree that was dead in his backyard. And when they went out there, Nick was hiding behind some raised flower beds they had in their backyard. And the backyard was a secured area for the 2 little dogs they had, so both gates were locked from the inside. So he had to have jumped the fence to get back there.
Nick basically jumped up and kind of went towards him, in a joking manner, like to scare him. And Lloyd wasn't impressed by it. He didn't think it was funny.
After stealing from the family and joining a gang, this was the final straw for Lloyd.
He basically told Nick that he was not welcome at that property ever again.
It made us feel on guard and very uncomfortable, and we think it's best that it's time for him to move back home. I then text Nicholas and told him that he could come and pick up all the clothing and furniture that we had purchased for him over that time period, and he could take it home with him. I never really saw him again after that.
Could the Ortiz's rejection of Nicholas lead him to kill? Had he murdered Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen in cold-blooded revenge? The police bring in Nick for questioning.
Do you know anything about this case that could help us?
Police in El Rancho, New Mexico have a new suspect in the murders of Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen Ortiz. An unrelated 16-year-old named Nicholas Ortiz.
Do you know anything about this case that could help us?
I don't. The only thing that I've heard is what people have told me from the news.
He came off as this calm kid that didn't do anything wrong. He was just kind of like your baseline kid.
Detectives confront Nicholas about his speedy exit from the Ortiz home.
Lloyd just told you. What exactly did he say? You remember?
Yeah, telling me that I have to have my trust with them, not to go near them anymore or anything. I said, okay, fine. So you guys want to leave? And that was really the last time we spoke.
Okay. How did you feel then?
The detectives ask where he was the night of the murder.
He said he was at home with his dad and sisters leading up to Father's Day. Between 12 and 1 o'clock, he woke his father up and wished him a happy Father's Day and went back to bed. And he was there when his mom got off of work, which was around 7:30 in the morning. Everything was corroborated as far as his alibi.
Not only does Nicholas have a solid alibi, his demeanor in the interview doesn't suggest he is the killer.
Do you think if you found out who did that?
If I found out who did it, I would call the police right away.
Police find people in the community who vouch for Nick.
Nicholas was part of our congregation. He was very, very gentlemanlike. He was kind. He was willing to help. He would stay late sometimes and help us pick up after the church.
Police cross Nicholas Ortiz off the suspect list. Then, 2 days after the murder, they get an urgent call from Cherie Ortiz.
I called the police and I told them we found out about a safe that was well hidden, enough where my sister and I didn't even know it existed. At my parents' house, my Uncle Walter had called me and said, I built your dad a secret piece of furniture that would hide a safe in it.
The unit was so well concealed, the police had not found it when they searched the house days earlier.
I said, I do not want to know any more until we contact the police. So we had to have it opened up there at the police station.
Inside was $80,000 in cash. as well as some of the life insurance paperwork.
That's when we found that my dad had been saving money for years. He had his retirement saved in there.
Cherie says she didn't know about the money, but police make a discovery that puts her claim in doubt.
We had learned through district court that the power of attorney had been given to Cherie at this point, and she was basically going to be the heir of hundreds of thousands of dollars in life insurance policies that Lloyd and Dixie had. And that $80,000 that was in the safe was part of a cash out from those life insurance policies.
Cherie says she didn't know about the insurance policy. The inheritance was large enough to give Cherie and Jesse a powerful motive for murder. But motive alone wasn't enough to arrest either one of them.
We have no physical evidence that could tie Cherie and Jesse to the crime.
The discovery of the safe also causes police to speculate on how the Ortizes had amassed so much money. Could it have anything to do with the marijuana growing on the property?
Kind of raised some concern to us as to why he was growing it. Are they possibly selling this stuff?
Detectives investigate whether Lloyd was secretly involved in trafficking. The answer comes back clear.
Nothing was taken from this house. It didn't even appear that whoever was there at the time knew that there was pot plants being grown behind this fence. And knowing anything about the industry of marijuana, there were smaller plants, they weren't mature. We were able to pretty much rule out that the gangs were tied in to this.
It's another blow for the investigation. And as days turn to weeks, detectives are no closer to catching those responsible.
Essentially, you do run out of leads or you run into dead ends. As frustrating as it was for us as investigators, it had to have been exponentially worse for the family.
I was on the phone with the police every single day asking, what have they heard? Anything new? What can I do to help? And we were always told, nothing. There's nothing you can do.
I truly felt like they were not ever going to solve this case.
Then, 16 months after the murders, detectives get the break they've been praying for when they receive a call from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Department.
In October of 2012, I had just gotten home from work and I got a call that there's somebody there that wants to give some information to me in reference to the homicide. And she was in jail. She said she just wants to get something off her chest.
Detectives are hopeful a new tip will finally help solve the murders of Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen Ortiz. The information comes from a young woman in the custody of Santa Fe police.
Ashley Ball was 24, and she has a history of burglaries and of drug use.
Ashley told officers that she knew something about the El Rancho murders. At that point, ears started to perk within law enforcement.
Before questioning Ashley, police look into her background.
Ashley grew up in El Rancho.
Ashley wasn't necessarily a troubled teen per se, but she got in trouble a lot.
From a young age, was in and out of the detention center.
Lead detective Craig Bobnock questions Ashley about what she knows.
As I started explaining that it was a voluntary interview, she kept interrupting me saying, I know who did it, I know who did it.
Ashley claims that on the night of the murder, she was smoking weed with her cousin, Jose Roybal, and a mutual friend.
They needed money, so they were gonna go hit the Ortiz's house. And I took them, I dropped them off, and I went back home.
She told me that she owned a gray 1997 Saturn car, two-door car, during the time of the homicide. So I immediately thought of Jesse's statement.
Cherie Ortiz's husband, Jesse Rios, had told police he saw a gray car driving slowly past their house late on the night of the murder. But it's what Ashley says next that grabs detectives' attention.
And I got a call about maybe half an hour, 45 minutes later.
The call was from Jose's friend, and he needed a ride.
He got in my car. He had blood on his pants. He had a trash bag tied around his right foot. That's when he told me that he killed Stephen, Dixie, and Lloyd. He said he threw the pickaxe by the fence. He kept saying he killed him, he messed up, he killed him.
Ashley told me that the single person that killed the Ortiz family was Nick Ortiz.
Ashley's revelation is explosive. This family took in Nick when he was having trouble at home.
He stayed there for upwards of a couple of months, in which he got very close with the family. He would eat there, he would get off the school bus there. It was basically his home, and they took him in.
But police need to be sure Ashley's telling the truth. After all, she has a rap sheet, and their suspect has an alibi.
The information that Ashley Roybal provided had to have come from somebody who was actually there during the incident.
Ashley explains another detail that puts her at the scene.
Do they wear gloves? Do they care about fingerprints, usually?
He had a sock on his hand.
He did have a sock on his hand?
Mm-hmm.
Police are hopeful they can find evidence in Ashley's car, but it's nowhere to be found.
It's 18 months later. She had said she had sold it to a tow company. The vehicle ultimately ended up at the shredder. Couldn't find it.
Investigators had to find another way to verify her story.
I received a lot of the phone logs, and that was my big piece of evidence at this point.
Cell phone records show the communication between Nicholas, Ashley, and her cousin Jose peaked around the time of the murders, so investigators immediately bring Nick back in to confront him with the evidence.
So I brought Nick in. He's in 100% denial of everything until I bring up the phone records.
I'm just gonna show you, these are your texts between you and Jose. You're the orange and he's the white. That's how much you guys texted on Saturday night into Sunday morning. Is it surprising?
Well, with all due respect to you guys and all that, I'd really like to just stop talking and go home.
Okay.
I want another chance at another interview with him, so I didn't want to ruin it. So we ended the interview.
Investigators' next move is to haul in Jose for questioning. Since he's a minor, they get permission from his parents to speak to him.
He was 15 at the time. He drank a lot. He had problems at home. He didn't have a good reputation.
Police talk to Jose, and he opens up.
Ashley dropped me and Nick off so we could go rub the house. She left. Nick told me he would go in. He wanted me to go in with him to go kill. And I told him no. I didn't want to. I was scared. He started walking towards the house. When he started walking towards the house, I ran to the river. I got to my house. And then Ashley and Nick show up. Nick is white as a ghost. I knew he had did it. He told me he had did it. He told me he did it.
Jose's story matches Ashley's, and suddenly police have two witnesses against Nicholas.
On February 12th, 2015, I got the approval from the district attorney to get an arrest warrant for Nick Ortiz. District court judge signed it and said, go pick him up.
Just like before, Nicholas remains uncooperative.
So I brought him in a copy of the criminal complaint. There were 5 total charges on the criminal complaint that I gave him. He said, I don't agree with 2 of these charges on here. And there were only 2 charges that were different from murder. So it's an admission to me. I knew I had him at that point. It was him.
With Nicholas taken into custody, detectives finally have some news for the Ortiz family.
I absolutely was shocked when the police said he had done this. I didn't think I have ever known anybody in my life who could do something like that brutal. I've never met anybody that could hurt people so grossly. It didn't make sense because that was not at all his personality when he lived with us.
People were in disbelief. As a pastor, it was hard for me to even fathom the fact that a young man like this could do something so tragic, this gruesome.
On June 15th, 2015, Nicholas goes to trial for massacring the Ortiz family.
Nick was a minor at the time. Given the fact that this was a heinous triple homicide, the judge did agree with my office that Nicholas should be charged as an adult.
When the trial starts, the prosecution is confident of a conviction until an unexpected development jeopardizes the whole case.
So in the middle of trial, we received a big surprise in Jose changing his testimony completely.
Nicholas Ortiz alone stands accused of a savage triple murder. His two former friends are taking plea bargains to testify against him. But just as prosecutors think it's a cut-and-dry case, the unexpected happens.
So in the middle of trial, we received a big surprise in Jose changing his testimony completely, pointing at Ashley as the individual who instructed them to kill the family.
Originally, the plan was to rob the Ortiz family, but according to Jose, Ashley had something more sinister in mind.
Jose Roybal testified that Ashley said, "Why don't you just kill them?"
It's a stunning statement, which the defense denies.
The case agent said, well, she said she didn't say that. And then the lawyer said, yeah, but Jose Roybal says she did, so somebody must be lying. Jose testified that Ashley gave the two boys socks to cover up their hands and plastic bags with Kleenex in them to cover up their feet so that they wouldn't leave traces there. He also said that she is the one that handed Nick the weapon.
According to Jose, in the early hours of June 19th, 2011, Ashley tells Nicholas and Jose it's time to put her unthinkable plan into action.
Ashley takes Jose and Nick to the Ortiz house, drops them off.
Jose got scared. He left. He ran home. Nick went towards the house.
He knocks on the back door. Lloyd Ortiz gets up out of bed. When he opens it, he's attacked by Nicholas with the pickaxe.
He didn't stop there. He went into the house and struck Dixie twice in her temple on the right side of her head with the pickaxe.
Nicholas moved on to the kitchen looking for the money, but he found Stephen instead.
Recognizing who is in his house, Stephen puts up a fight.
Nick delivers 17 blows to his head and body and kills him.
After Nick killed the three Ortizes, he didn't take anything. He got scared, so he just left. He walked out the door and called Ashley.
The revelations come as a shock to the victim's family.
Every day that we were at that trial, it was devastating because we learned things. I learned things that I didn't know. And I wish I hadn't, because it still haunts me.
Nick doesn't say a thing during the entire trial. It's Jose's word against Ashley's. How would their competing testimonies affect the jury?
The case was based almost entirely on Ashley and Jose's testimony, and that was a point of contention amongst people up until the sentencing.
After 3.5 days, I remember the jury went into the courtroom and the foreperson said, we're just no matter how much time you give us, we're just not going to come to a consensus. So the judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial.
It was horrible. It was devastating to me.
I felt like our hearts had been ripped out. We had all this hope.
Luckily, we have the opportunity to try him again, which we did.
17 months later, in December 2016, the case goes back to court.
Luckily, this time around, we proved to all 12 jurors that Nicholas Ortiz was the individual that killed those 3 people.
On October 28, 2019, Nicholas is sentenced to 25 years in prison. The victory rings hollow for the victims' loved ones.
What that felt like to me was each victim, my mom, my dad, and my brother, was only worth 8 years each. That's exactly what that is. It's a joke. That's not justice.
He's gonna do probably 12 to 15 years. No way. No way.
Ashley Roybal received a 20-year sentence. 6 years of that was suspended, so 14 years of incarceration.
Jose got full immunity for his testimony. He never got so much as probation.
Even though years have passed since the murders, their effects remain.
I would say I'm sorry to my parents and my brother. I'm sorry I wasn't there to help you. So I would say I love you and I miss you and I'm so sorry.
I want them to be remembered through their compassion, their love for children, their love for life, how they lived for us as their daughters, for my brother, and to remind us each day that that's how we should live.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to oxygen.com. A gregarious young man, just months away from his wedding day.
He was always happy. All he wanted in life was to have a family, work hard, and fall in love.
Has his future viciously ripped away.
It was evident the young man had been bludgeoned.
It hurt me so much, and I lost it. I lost it. Me volví loca.
Investigators are sent down a rabbit hole of suspects.
He was violently jealous. He's a significant drug dealer. It looked like that he may have been kidnapped.
They were accompanying a very scared-looking Hispanic young man.
Before a shocking revelation.
What he was describing was more like something off of a TV show.
Turns the case on its head.
What he did to us changed our life forever.
It was a shock to all of us.
It came as an absolute surprise.
He had no remorse, he had no guilt. He's a monster.
Cornelius, a small town in northern Oregon, nestled among picturesque orchards.
Cornelius is a longtime farming community. It's a very kind of nice, sort of sleepy place.
It's kind of a little bedroom community. It's mostly a blue-collar town, working class.
The calm of Cornelius is shaken one quiet morning with the reported disappearance of 20-year-old Gonzalo Pizano Guzman.
That morning, my mom saw that Gonzalo's bed was made, like no one slept there. So she obviously got all concerned. He didn't come home last night. And then my mom tells me to go to the police station with Sol. to report him missing.
His fiancee, Sol, and his sister, Juana, had been actively looking for him that day.
That morning, the family contacted his place of employment. He had not shown up for work.
The family was extremely distraught by this disappearance. He doesn't miss work without calling in. They couldn't reach him by pager or by telephone.
And we're all freaking out because this is not who he is and what he does. It's so odd. It's not normal.
We learned that Sol had seen Gonzalo the night before. They had visited with each other until about 9:15 that evening, and Sol reported seeing him leaving in his car alone, headed home.
But he did not return home last night.
To aid the detectives, Sol provides a description of what Gonzalo was wearing when she last saw him.
He had on an athletic top with some numbers on it, and specifically 2 gold chains.
While Juana and Sol speak with police, other family members frantically look for Gonzalo.
We all went different ways in our cars, driving around just to see if we found his car. We were trying to look for anything.
My dad thought, maybe he got in an accident. We were desperate. We just wanted a clue.
Around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we all started feeling like, okay, something's wrong now.
On the outskirts of town, Gonzalo's father makes a disturbing discovery.
My dad spotted the car in an empty field. When he saw the car, the white car, he knew right away that was Gonzalo's car. He found the car burned up. He rushed to the car, opened up the car, and didn't find any body. So once that happened, it was just nuts. Where is he at? Did he get kidnapped? Is he dead? It was even worse.
Detectives arrive and search for signs of what happened to Gonzalo.
The car was totally destroyed by fire. It appeared that the car had been heavily doused with accelerant, probably gasoline.
Somebody was clearly trying to cover up evidence from inside that vehicle.
There was no evidence of any body.
There were zip ties found near the car.
As far as the scene was concerned, it yielded minimal clues. As the car had been burned completely, the chances of DNA or blood or fingerprints were greatly reduced.
Later that afternoon, another chilling discovery is made, just 11 miles away.
A citizen had seen something that looked like a dead body in the ditch on her road. The body was found about a 15-20 minute drive from where the burned car was.
This young man matched both the physical description, the clothing, and the jewelry. At this point, there was no doubt that this was Gonzalo. It was clearly a homicide. There was evidence of bullet wounds on the body and what appeared to be repeated knife blows to the heart. We also discovered some injuries to the back of the head, and it was evident the young man had been bludgeoned.
It was apparent that he died a violent death.
We felt almost immediately that this was very personal in nature. There was no phone and there was no wallet at the scene, but he still had his jewelry with him, which were gold. So the thought of this being a robbery was off the table pretty quickly. There was another motive here.
There were zip ties found near the body, and they matched the zip ties from the scene of the car. One of the things that went through my head was, had someone brought zip ties to restrain Gonzalo? We also located 4 spent casings from a .40 caliber semi-automatic pistol.
After finishing up at the crime scene, police are faced with the difficult task of delivering the devastating news to Gonzalo's family.
The police came early in the morning. I opened the door and they told me, "We found your brother, but unfortunately he's dead." I was in shock.
Grité. Me volví loca. Y yo gritaba. Y gritaba y gritaba.
I heard my mom screaming. It was something I never want to hear again. It's not even a scream. It's a pain so deep that only moms Only moms know what that is. I found out that he was murdered. And I lost it. I lost it. Era gritar, llorar. Algo tan fuerte que todavía de mi mente no se ha acabado. To know that such an amazing person was taken away, he didn't deserve to die that way. Bottom line is, I don't have my brother anymore.
Born in Mexico in 1979, Gonzalo had a playful spirit.
He loved to dance, he loved music, always a smile, always caring, and always joking around with people.
Gonzalo era un muchacho alegre y llegaba, me abrazaba y siempre quería bailar conmigo.
When the family moved to the United States in 1989, outgoing Gonzalo settled in quickly.
He was very charming. He was really good looking. He was popular with the girls. So he was always asked to be in quinceañeras, which is a traditional, party for us Mexicans when you turn 15.
In 1998, Gonzalo met Marisol Mora at a party, and the teenagers quickly fell in love.
De que estaba muy enamorado de Marisol. Marisol era el amor de su vida de Gonzalo. Era todo para él. Todo.
It was that genuine love and happiness. There was a light in him. He was a completely different person, a happy, full person. All he wanted in life was to have a family, work hard, and fall in love.
After a whirlwind romance, Gonzalo proposed to Marisol.
So the wedding was set to be in September. That was just a couple of months after he was murdered. We have a big family, so it was going to be a big deal.
But instead of a wedding, Gonzalo's loved ones are left heartbroken and grieving. While his family plans a funeral, detectives are digging into the work of this homicide case.
This case was puzzling. There really didn't seem to be a strong motive as to why this young man was murdered. Everything was going good in his life.
He was responsible. He wasn't involved in gangs.
He's just very well-liked, very upbeat, and just a trustworthy young man.
It was really difficult. There were still so many unanswered questions, and we had no definitive leads as to who would have caused this or who we were looking for.
The fact that there was still a killer out there, to me, it was very ominous.
This is very grim. We needed to really look into who was responsible for this.
Coming up, investigators uncover a menacing grudge.
He held an extreme dislike for Gonzalo.
He was determined to have Gonzalo killed.
The knife wounds directed at the heart did speak of extreme animosity.
And leads them to discover a web of alarming secrets and lies.
She wasn't in love with Gonzalo, and he wasn't in love with her.
She admitted it was all a lie.
He saw skinheads in the vehicle.
And that's when we really started to think something was wrong.
Before the truth blindsides everyone.
I was like in shock. It was so senseless. It was so senseless.
In the town of Cornelius, Oregon, police are investigating the vicious murder of 20-year-old Gonzalo Pizano Guzman. Wanting more details about his last known movements, detectives speak to his fiancée, Sol.
She described in detail how Gonzalo had come to her house on the night of the 6th, that they sat out front on the porch.
They were discussing their plans for the upcoming wedding and going over a guest list. She stated that following the conversation that he left around 9 o'clock. She stated while they were sitting on the porch that her cousin Jaime and a friend Eddie were playing in the garage of the house, apparently shooting baskets.
That led us to believe that these two young fellows may have been the last known persons to see Gonzalo alive. So it was important that we interview them.
Investigators bring Jaime and Eddie into the sheriff's office.
During the interview, both stated that they had to get to work that night and approached Gonzalo as he was getting in his car and asked if they could get a ride
They were running late for work. They worked on a janitorial crew run by Saul's brother, Raphael.
They had to be at work in Hillsboro at the Hawthorne Farms Fitness Center at 10 o'clock.
They said Raphael picked them up and took them to work at the athletic club, and that eventually they got off at about 4:30 in the morning.
The fact that they both gave the same statement actually provided themselves an alibi. They did not offer any conflict that they had with Gonzalo. They indicated that they had no reason to hurt him.
To corroborate Jaime and Eddie's alibi, police speak to their boss, Saul's brother, Raphael.
We interviewed him at his house. He was very cooperative, very smooth, very polite, had his own business, a young entrepreneur.
Raphael was an incredibly self-possessed 19-year-old. He had created a janitorial service.
Although he was very young, had a very good contract, had his own cleaning company, and appeared to be very successful.
Detectives ask him to confirm Jaime and Eddie's story.
He confirmed that he had picked them up at Eddie's house and drove them to work. He confirmed their story that they had worked cleaning the health club that night. He said that he was at the athletic club until about 4 in the morning. So Raphael, in effect, corroborates Eddie and Jaime's version of events on the night of the 6th. So we kind of set them aside.
With Jaime and Eddie alibied, investigators turned to the autopsy report, hoping to find new leads.
It became very apparent just how violently he had died.
The medical examiner did find 3 blunt force blows to his skull.
The autopsy also showed that he had been shot 5 times. And then he had also been stabbed 5 times, very brutally, in the area of the heart.
The close cluster of the knife wounds directed at the heart did speak of extreme animosity, some violent emotion.
The gunshot wounds made it appear that his hands were up in a defensive gesture.
Gonzalo was likely pleading for some measure of mercy, and ultimately, none was to be had.
The autopsy report also determines that Gonzalo's death occurred around 10 p.m. With the findings in hand, investigators now turn to Gonzalo's workplace, searching for possible suspects.
We interviewed his supervisor. Gonzalo's boss described him as reliable, steady worker, punctual.
As detectives dig deeper, they learn about a startling new side to Gonzalo.
It appeared that he had a relationship with one of the security guards that worked there.
Gonzalo's boss did tell us there may have been some possible involvement between the security guard, Bobette, and Gonzalo. So we needed to look into it. We needed to interview her.
Police bring Bobette, Gonzalo's alleged girlfriend, in for questioning.
She was very upset about his death.
She was very emotional, very distraught about finding out that Gonzalo had been murdered, and ultimately disclosed that, in fact, she had had a very intimate relationship with Gonzalo for a couple months, but she made it very clear she wasn't in love with Gonzalo, and he wasn't in love with her.
Bobette described her relationship with Gonzalo as kind of a fling. It was kept secret. She understood that he was engaged to be married, but it crossed our minds that maybe Bobette's feelings were stronger than she let on.
Maybe she did not want this wedding to go forward.
The wedding was planned for September, only a few months away. Police asked Gonzalo's coworker about her movements on the day of the murder.
Bobette had been at several different locations that day, running errands, and she had receipts to support that. So she was ruled out as a suspect.
But while Bobette's cleared of suspicion, she hands detectives a crucial tip.
Bobette mentioned an ex-boyfriend named Oscar Rodriguez.
She told us Oscar was quite jealous.
He was extraordinarily jealous, apparently had been violently jealous in the past.
About 4 days before the murder, Oscar had found out about her relationship with Gonzalo. He became infuriated and began accusing her of cheating on him.
that could be a motive for Gonzalo's murder. So Oscar became a lead suspect.
Only 2 days into the investigation of the vicious murder of Gonzalo Pizano Guzman, police discover he was involved with his coworker, Bobette. Now she's pointed the finger at her jealous ex, Oscar Rodriguez.
She speculated that maybe he had something to do with it. We looked into him. He had a criminal history.
He'd been pretty extensively involved in gangs at that point in his life, and he was well known to the local police.
Very much an impulsive young man that was also involved in drug activity and drug use. Bobette told us that this was a relationship she had to escape from. She personally felt threatened by his presence and his behavior.
And she was very worried that perhaps he was the one that took some action towards Gonzalo.
Investigators uncover a troubling detail about Oscar's life.
It was discovered that Oscar Rodriguez's mother lived right next door to the victim's family.
The investigation kind of perked up as far as focusing in on Oscar, given the fact that he had such access to Gonzalo.
Detective suspicion grows further when they speak to Oscar himself.
When Oscar Rodriguez was interviewed, he lied to us and told us he had not had any contact at all with Bobette and didn't really know anything about what was going on. When we started to confront him that this was in contradiction to the information that we had from Bobette, he became furious, started yelling at us. "You don't trust me." He stated he had no claims to continue any relationship with Bobette, and he wanted to wash his hands of this entire investigation. Because of his nature, he just drew suspicion upon himself.
He was asked if he'd take a polygraph to show that he didn't have anything to do with Gonzalo's murder. He became very volatile and immediately demanded to end the interview.
And actually stormed out of the interview.
With Oscar not cooperating, detectives investigate his whereabouts during the time of the murder.
During this time frame, Oscar Rodriguez was actually serving a sentence in the Restitution Center.
The Restitution Center is a work-release facility for low to mid-level offenders, where Oscar could get passes to go out and find work.
So the question was, did Oscar have a pass at the date and time of the murder? Was it possible that he wasn't in the Restitution Center?
He is on a strict timeline. He had to check in, check out. It's a secure facility. The building is locked. There are alarms on all the doors and windows.
At the Restitution Center, there is a lockdown period at night until early in the morning.
After the records were examined, it was positively concluded that he was in the Restitution Center at the time Gonzalo was killed.
It was impossible for him to have been involved in the actual homicide.
And ultimately, he was ruled out as a suspect.
It's been a week since the murder, and the investigation is no closer to finding a suspect. Meanwhile, the family prepares to bury their beloved Gonzalo.
It was really hard on everybody. My mom decided she wanted to take him to Mexico. He was buried over there, and we all stayed for a while trying to grieve together as a family and process what had just happened to our family. My mom was just devastated.
It hurt me so much to lose Gonzalo. I was grieving deeply. I was in denial. I was in my own world. And I don't even know how I got by.
While the family grieves in Mexico, the community of Cornelius is feeling on edge.
There wasn't a quick arrest within a couple days or a week. This caused concern in the community because no one knew who did it.
Searching for new leads, detectives turn to the public.
We decided to put out a reward for information, and the idea was to get people to come forward if they knew anything and let them know that we're a little bit frustrated with where this investigation is going. We need public help.
Nearly 2 weeks after Gonzalo's murder, police get a tip that sends the investigation in a whole new direction.
We got a call from an employee of the SB gas station.
His name was Ryan Petty. He claimed that he had seen some graffiti written in the bathroom of the gas station. And the graffiti said, Gonzalo Guzman, 12th Street Gang, please help, call the police.
And once he heard about the reward, he put Gonzalo with that name Gonzalo and recognized it must be the same victim who had left that cry for help on the wall.
Detectives rush to the gas station to interview Ryan. While interviewing him, he divulges a shocking revelation.
So what called his attention to the bathroom was shortly before he saw a car pull up, a white Monte Carlo, that had, in his words, skinheads in the vehicle.
One of them allegedly had a swastika tattooed on his body.
They were accompanying a very scared-looking Hispanic young man.
He stated that it looked like that Gonzalo may have been kidnapped. That was significant in the fact that we felt this was a big break that came in the case.
Nearly 2 weeks after Gonzalo Pizano Guzman was found brutally murdered, a gas station attendant named Ryan Petty has told police he saw Gonzalo with 3 suspicious men the night he was killed.
He described a carload of skinheads that had drove up and a young man in the back seat who appeared frightened, and they escorted him into the men's restroom for a short period of time.
He said that ultimately out of the bathroom, the Hispanic individual came out and they hustled him back into the car and drove away. Ryan Petty reported that when he went into the bathroom after an individual left it, he saw written on the wall, Gonzalo Guzman, help 12th Street Gang, call police.
But as detectives dig into Ryan's story, some details don't add up.
Had it been Gonzalo who had gone into that bathroom afraid for his life and put his name on the wall, he never would have written his name as Gonzalo Guzman.
We knew that was incorrect. He would not sign his name in that nature. That was the maternal name. He would have used the paternal name.
Guzman is his mother's name. He would have written his name as Gonzalo Pizano. Pizano is his father's name.
And so, right away, this was suspicious.
And just the whole nature of what he was describing was more like something off of a TV show. The skinheads, the swastika. It just didn't ring true.
And so it was suspected that he was trying to come forward for the reward. We looked through the videotape from the SB station during the period of time this employee stated that car had gone by. There was nothing in that videotape that corroborated anything he had told us.
No white Monte Carlo, no individuals who could be characterized as skinheads. More importantly, no individual who was a scared Hispanic person being escorted to the bathroom.
The examination of the surveillance video at the gas station contradicted Ryan Petty's version of events. And also, one of the issues was he didn't report this right away.
When police check Ryan's record, they find more troubling news.
He had a pretty checkered past.
He was no stranger to the criminal justice system.
Some of his arrests were for crimes that would cause you to doubt his honesty. In my mind, we ruled it out as pure fabrication. It just was too cute, too stereotypical. The mistake with the Spanish surname, I didn't buy it.
With another lead exhausted, investigators face a daunting realization.
We reached a point where we were getting nowhere. Leads weren't panning out.
Having no significant suspect is very depressing.
Really, if you don't solve these cases early on, the longer they go, the likelihood that you're actually going to be able to solve them becomes less and less.
In cases like this where we're not getting anywhere, especially on a homicide, we took this very personal. Up to that point, this team had not had an unresolved homicide.
The lack of progress also adds to the pain suffered by Gonzalo's family.
It was very hard. It was very painful to come back from Mexico, and there was no arrest yet.
Fue algo fuerte para mí, mucho dolor. Tenía mucho coraje y mucho odio en mi corazón.
Everything was very silent, and we were getting very, very impatient. My mom was getting very impatient with the detectives, and all they told us is to please trust them. So we put our life in their hands.
2 more months pass without an arrest. With the case at a standstill, detectives review the entire investigation for something they may have missed.
It can be very frustrating when you reach that point where you've kind of hit the wall, but you just have to resolve to redouble your efforts and to keep digging, keep pushing.
It was time to go back and look over everybody one more time. We knew that Eddie and Jaime were the last people to see Gonzalo at Saul's house the night of the murder.
Even though they'd been interviewed and gave a pretty good account of their activity that night, their boss, Rafael, provided an alibi for them. We wanted to be sure. So at this stage is when we asked them to take a polygraph. But when we began to ask them to take a polygraph, they started dodging and weaving.
For some reason, they began to balk, and this threw a red flag as to why they weren't coming forward. Again, these are the last 2 people to see Gonzalo alive. And now they're getting cold feet about taking a polygraph exam.
And that's when we really started to think something was wrong.
Detectives keep the pressure on Jaime and Eddie, and on September 14th, Eddie comes in for his polygraph.
The polygrapher was hooking Eddie up, attaching these leads to him to measure his response. And he doesn't even get to the questions. And Eddie says, "Okay, I'll tell you what happened."
And he immediately makes it clear that he wants to tell everything that happened.
In police parlance, he spilled it.
Two months after the murder of Gonzalo Pizano Guzman, detectives are re-interviewing witnesses, hoping for a break. Now, Eddie, one of the last people to see Gonzalo alive, has told police he knows more than he's let on.
He gave a detailed, recorded statement about what happened on the night of the murder.
As he talks to investigators, Eddie drops a bombshell.
He disclosed that he had actually been approached by his boss, Rafael, who was Saul's brother, to coordinate delivering Gonzalo to the Forest Hills Country Club parking lot.
Eddie told us that it had all been planned out by Rafael. Rafael had enlisted Joe Noble to help with this crime. Joe was Rafael's friend. Eddie went on to tell us that night he and Jaime lured Gonzalo to drive his car to the golf course. And as they pulled up, Joe Noble appeared with a gun in his hand. And as Eddie and Jaime got out of Gonzalo's car, Noble got into the car, pointing the gun at Gonzalo. And also present in the parking lot was Rafael and his white Ford F-150.
Gonzalo was driven away by Rafael and Joe, but Eddie claims he has no idea what happened next.
He stated that he and Jaime had left the country club and got into their vehicle, left and went home and went to work as usual.
Could the brother of Gonzalo's fiancée, Saul, really be behind his brutal murder?
It was extremely surprising to suddenly see Rafael Mora as somebody different than this really incredibly self-possessed 19-year-old who started his own business.
But according to Eddie, Rafael leads a disturbing double life.
Eddie told us that Rafael was a pretty active drug dealer.
The nice entrepreneur cover of Rafael was all a lie. He's a significant drug dealer, and it appears orchestrated the kidnapping of Gonzalo with Joe Noble.
This completely surprised me. Rafael did appear, at least on the surface, to be legit, and now he's just not who we thought he was.
It was a shock to all of us.
The one thing detectives still need to know is why Rafael would want to kill his future brother-in-law.
Up to that point in time, there was nothing to link him. There was no motive that anybody could speak of.
Investigators first turn their attention to Joe Noble, suspecting he may have been taking orders from Raphael.
Joe Noble was known as a small-time criminal. An informant told us he was very concerned about a .40 caliber pistol he had sold to Joe Noble. And he suspected that this may have been the murder weapon used in the killing of Gonzalo.
That's not the last of the informant's revelations.
He said that Joe Noble had talked to a female at one of the local bars and had asked her to alibi for him on that particular night in question.
We contacted her. She told us that yes, Joe had asked her to say he was with her on the night of the 6th, and most importantly, she said I wasn't with him.
Police bring Joe in for questioning.
Joe denied having any involvement whatsoever to the murder.
During our interview with Joe, he actually tried to use the alibi, and then when we confronted him with the fact that we'd already talked to her and she said it was all BS, then he stopped talking.
Joel stated that he wanted an attorney and didn't want to talk anymore.
With nothing concrete to hold Joe, police are forced to release him and turn their attention to Raphael.
Investigators learned that Raphael's cleaning business was not all that it was purported to be. He had a contract with the Hawthorne Farms Athletic Club.
The manager of the health club was not very impressed with the quality of Raphael's work and the work of his crew.
It was really a shoddy operation, by all accounts.
We considered the fact that the cleaning company may have been a front for Raphael's drug dealing.
Raphael told police he was cleaning the gym with Eddie and Jaime the night of Gonzalo's murder, so investigators checked with management in order to corroborate his alibi.
The manager of the club said he often couldn't reach him, so we had no idea if he was there or not on the night of the murder.
With his alibi falling apart, detectives ask Raphael's sister, Saul, why he might want Gonzalo dead.
Saul admitted that Raphael had had a serious talk with her and that it was clear that he was opposed to the wedding, felt she was too young.
Raphael did not want Gonzalo marrying Saul.
Just did not see Gonzalo as being worthy of marrying into the family. Investigators learned that Raphael would mock Gonzalo for the car he drove. He'd mock him for bringing over a bottle of wine to his parents that was cheap and not any good.
Raphael held an extreme dislike for Gonzalo. When accompanied by friends, he would go by Gonzalo's car and talk about keying it or smashing a window out and laughing about it.
With the evidence against Raphael stacking up, police are ready to bring him in for an interview. But there's just one setback.
He disappeared. At this point, it's become pretty apparent that Raphael's got something to hide. When you put it all together, there was probable cause to arrest him.
With a warrant for Raphael's arrest, police initiate a manhunt.
He had a girlfriend named Sandy Montez. We found him hiding at his girlfriend's house. He had dyed his hair orange, and it was obvious that he had done it to try to change his identity.
On September 28, 2000, Raphael is officially charged with first-degree kidnapping and aggravated murder.
I was like in shock. I had so much anger at Raphael. It's an anger I can't explain.
Just when police believe they have their man, the investigation takes another shocking turn.
We had Raphael in custody when his girlfriend showed up with evidence stating that there's no way he could have been at the murder scene. This raised some obvious concerns.
Could it be possible that Raphael was not involved in Gonzalo's murder?
It came as an absolute surprise.
Police have arrested Rafael Mora in the death of his sister's fiancé, Gonzalo Pizano Guzman. But now, Rafael's girlfriend, Cindy, claims she has an alibi for him on the night of the murder.
Cindy produced a receipt from a auto detailing place that purported to have dropped off Raphael's vehicle the night of the murder, and that Raphael was there and signed for it. It was presented as a solid piece of evidence that Raphael was working at the athletic club the night in question, and they had the receipt to prove it. And an individual named Cassandra, who owned the company, had signed off and was going to be an alibi witness.
Checking the validity of the receipt, police interview Cassandra, who admits to being a friend of Raphael.
With a little bit of prodding by the investigators, she finally admitted that, in fact, the receipt was fake.
She confessed it was all a lie, orchestrated by Raphael.
It was something that she dummied up because Raphael had asked her to.
With Raphael's alibi discredited, investigators turn up the heat on co-conspirator Joe Noble.
He told the officers that he hadn't been completely honest.
He admitted that he was at the parking lot at the golf course. He was there when the car was burned. He admits the kidnap. He admits to pistol whipping the victim.
He said that it was Raphael ordering him to do that. They then picked up Gonzalo, put him in the back of a Ford white pickup truck.
And then Raphael drove Joe home with the victim knocked out in the back of the truck.
But when he last saw Gonzalo, albeit knocked out, was still alive.
And then supposedly Raphael would have then driven back out to Hag Lake and killed Gonzalo.
Detectives have a hard time believing Joe was not there when Gonzalo was finally killed, but have no proof.
We had no physical evidence that we could link them to the crime, and it was frustrating.
Desperate, investigators obtain security footage from businesses along the route they believe Raphael and Joe would have taken to and from the murder. Something on one of the tapes grabs their attention.
We saw Raphael's pickup pull into the gas station to get gas.
And lo and behold, there's Joseph Noble getting out of the white Ford and going into the gas station.
And the timing of the gas station surveillance footage indicated that would have been probably shortly after the murder.
Police also obtain a warrant for Raphael's phone records.
Raphael insisted all along that he couldn't have committed the murder because he was miles away cleaning the gym. And lo and behold, at the time of the murder, his phone was not bouncing off the nearest tower to the athletic club. It was bouncing off the nearest tower to Hag Lake, which puts him in the area of the murder. That was huge.
I felt ecstatic because I knew in that moment that we had him, and it absolutely, conclusively meant that his alibi at the athletic club was false.
This was a big moment of actually having some physical evidence.
There's a great deal of satisfaction, too, having found the truth.
With the new evidence in hand, prosecutors are confident they can secure a conviction. And in 2003, Joe Noble and Raphael Mora are tried together.
Both were charged with aggravated murder and with kidnapping in the first degree.
At trial, prosecutors present a picture of what they believe happened to Gonzalo the night he was murdered.
Raphael did not want him marrying his sister.
Raphael was determined to have Gonzalo killed.
And so he hatched a plan to get Gonzalo out to the golf course.
Lured Gonzalo out there with Eddie and Jaime.
After getting out of the car, Gonzalo was beat and pistol whipped and thrown into the back seat of the pickup. Raphael or Joe then set the car on fire and they proceeded to Hag Lake.
They drove to an isolated spot. Gonzalo got out of the car. The gun was pointed at him.
We believe that he was shot multiple times by Joe, and that Raphael was the one that wanted to get the final word in and stabbed him multiple times in the heart.
On the stand, a witness reveals Raphael bragged to him about the murder.
That Gonzalo was begging for his life, that Gonzalo was promising that he would stop the relationship with Saul, that he would move to Mexico.
mató a mi hijo de esa manera tan cruel. Gonzalo no se merecía esa muerte tan fuerte, nada más para que no se casara con Marisol.
No one deserves to be killed that way. No one. It was so senseless. It was so senseless.
On April 28, 2003, the jury finds Rafael and Joe guilty of Gonzalo's murder.
Joe was sentenced to life with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Rafael was sentenced to straight life, no possibility of parole.
After 5 years in prison, Rafael appeals his conviction, arguing ineffective counsel.
The judge decided that this case should go back to trial, which was a shock to all of us.
Ultimately, a decision was made to allow Rafael to plead to manslaughter in the first degree.
Rafael's sentence is reduced to 25 years and 10 months. With time served, he will be eligible for early release in 2024.
He had no remorse. He had no guilt. He's a monster. What he did to us changed our life forever. He destroyed us.
Even after everything they've endured, Gonzalo's family remains inspired by his memory.
Yo lloré por muchos años, mucho tiempo, y un día yo lo soñé. Yo estoy bien, ma. No llores por mí. Yo estoy muy bien. Y yo lo miré riéndose y me dijo que ya no llorara por él, que él estaba bien, que él estaba en paz.
He was a happy person that wanted everybody around him to have that same joy and made sure that we were always laughing. Those are the moments that I will always cherish the most. Gonzalo was one of the most genuine men that I've known, that I continue to admire.
A single mother with a big heart.
If you needed anything, she was always there.
She was a sweet girl. Everybody loved her.
Is the victim of a bizarre murder.
Duct tape had been wrapped around her head about 14 times.
This is nothing I had ever seen before or even heard of before.
Leaving her young son as the only witness.
A 4-year-old child had been just mere feet away, his mother being killed.
Investigators focus on the men in her life.
This guy, he wouldn't look at us. He was more nervous than normal.
And that polygraph test, he passed. It was frustrating as hell.
She was using Norma's house for these sexual liaisons.
To unveil a killer hiding in plain sight.
Of everyone we dealt with, he was maybe the coolest customer of the bunch.
People didn't see that inner demon. He was an unexpected killer.
It just blows you away.
Port Hueneme, California, a peaceful beach town on the Pacific coast.
It's a hidden gem. Port Hueneme is about 60 miles north of LA. It's a completely different environment. It's a lot more relaxed.
It's a quiet town, and it's a town that has, for a long time, a ridiculously low crime rate and very rarely a homicide.
But the tranquility of the seaside community is shattered one summer morning when police get an urgent call.
On June 1st, 1993, it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, our dispatch received a call of a possible homicide.
An ex-husband had called up and said that his ex-wife had been murdered.
We hadn't had a homicide in over 3 years. It took me a second to realize, okay, this is real.
Detectives arrive to begin the investigation, but nothing can prepare them for the scene inside.
I got inside the house, and then it was like, oh my God. This is just too bizarre for words. She's laying on the floor, head encased in duct tape. It had been partially cut away, but it appeared as though someone had tried to wrap her like a mummy.
It went from the top of her forehead to the chin.
It was just incredibly strange. This is nothing I had ever seen before or even heard of before.
And some rigor mortis had set in the back portion of her body because she was laying on the back. Usually rigor mortis takes a number of hours to show up. We estimated that the victim probably died in the early morning hours. When I saw that duct tape, the first thing that entered my mind was this was somebody she knew. Whoever did it didn't want to have her look at them while they were committing the crime.
Looking to unravel the mystery of this bizarre murder, detectives turn to the victim's ex-husband, who claims to have discovered the body.
At the house, the ex-husband was there, his brother was there, and 2 younger sons were there.
The ex-husband, Tony, identifies the victim as 32-year-old Norma Rodriguez, mother to 2 boys, Andrew, 11 years old, and Austin, 4 years old.
Tony, he said that he had come over to the house to pick up the kids to take them to school, which was his regular practice.
The 2 boys were still asleep in their beds. When Tony realized what had happened to their mother, he told them to stay in their room until police arrived.
Tony, his brother Hector, and the 2 sons were transported to the Port Hueneme Police Department, where they were going to be interviewed separately. Tony and Hector were first at the house, and we needed to determine what happened.
Police continue to comb through the house looking for clues.
It was not a scene of extreme violence. There wasn't blood anywhere. There weren't a lot of things overturned.
In the bedroom, we located her purse, and it was intact. There wasn't anything that seemed to be missing.
This was not like a burglary that had gone wrong.
There's no sign of forced entry into the home. Then, something else catches the detective's eye.
I noticed a set of keys that were on the floor. They were in an unusual location, close to her body. We checked and confirmed they were Norma's house keys.
But why were Norma's keys lying next to her body? As investigators finish processing the scene, Norma's sister, Aralia, arrives.
I was supposed to pick her up because we were going to go looking for a car for her. And I had been calling her. And I drove to her house. That's when I saw the yellow tape. I saw the police department there, and that's what they told me would happen. And my worst nightmares, did I ever think that this would happen to my sister? It is horrible, horrible.
Norma Rodriguez was born and raised in rural Texas.
We're 7 sisters and 1 brother. She was the middle child, and, I was really close to Norma. She was very quiet, very reserved, a very big heart. If you needed anything, she was always there.
I first met Norma in 1975 in junior high school. We were 14 years old, and we became friends right away. Well, we used to hang out together and just go everywhere together. She could be feisty, but she was a sweet girl. Everybody loved her.
After high school, Norma moved to Oxnard, California for college and soon fell for another student named Tony.
She loved him. She just loved being with him.
Their college romance became more serious, and 2 years later in 1982, Tony popped the question. They soon had their first son, Andrew, and their second son, Austin, arrived 7 years later.
She was just a great mom. Norma was very devoted to her boys. Her boys were her life.
But in 1991, after almost 10 years together, Tony and Norma's marriage became strained.
Tony was really never around.
She was getting into arguments and fights with Tony, asking him to provide for them. She realized it would be an easier life for her if she just went on her own without Tony. And that's what she did.
Later that year, Norma moved with her sons to the neighboring town of Port Hueneme. She got a job at a local retail store and started a new chapter in her life.
Being a single mom, people might think that's a hard job. She enjoyed it. and it was hard for her, but she was happy.
Who would want to take the life of this loving mother, and in such a bizarre way? Later that day, at police headquarters, detectives begin to interview Norma's ex-husband, Tony Rodriguez, and his brother, Hector.
As the first two parties to the scene, the investigators had to look at them.
The detectives asked Tony about how he found Norma earlier that day.
Tony, he said that he had knocked on the door, but Norma didn't answer. Sons Andrew and Austin were asleep. The door was locked, so then he used a credit card in order to slip the lock, and he was able to open the front door.
When Tony and Hector entered the living room, they saw Norma lying on the floor, her face wrapped in duct tape.
Hector told us that he cut the tape because they didn't know whether she was deceased or not, and they wanted to try to make it easier for her to breathe. He's the one that had the scissors in his possession, and he's the one that decided to cut the tape off of her face.
We thought, wow, that's a little strange. Why is this guy doing this? Why is he messing up our evidence? You know, Hector told us that the body was still somewhat warm. And that didn't make sense because by that time she had full rigor mortis. I mean, she had obviously been deceased for a number of hours. I just wasn't buying it.
Investigators are skeptical. Is Hector misleading police because the two men have something to hide? They hone in on Tony and Hector as possible suspects.
We don't know these people. We don't know what they're capable of.
Tony and Hector are suspicious. And Tony, being Norma's ex, he was right at the top of our list.
Coming up, detectives broaden their hunt for a possible killer.
We've got countless potential witnesses, countless potential suspects, interviews with co-workers.
We didn't know who it was. I just wanted him off the streets.
Investigators suspect a love interest from Norma's past has something to hide.
It was a brief but intense relationship.
It was that selfishness, that narcissistic quality that would cause him to end someone else's life.
And what police uncover shocks everyone.
All this time, were we dealing with a true sociopath and, couldn't see it?
Mother of two, Norma Rodriguez, has been found murdered with her head wrapped in duct tape. Less than 24 hours into the investigation, detectives are interviewing their first suspect, starting with her ex-husband, Tony Rodriguez.
In a case like this, statistics will show you that an overwhelming amount of the time, it's going to be that significant other or former significant other who ends up being your suspect.
Investigators ask Tony about his relationship with Norma in the weeks leading up to her death.
At the time, Tony said that they had been separated for a couple of years. I don't believe they had filed for divorce yet, but they were living separately, and Tony had visitation rights. They weren't close friends anymore, but they tried to maintain the friendship for the boys.
But police have a different account from Norma's family.
We learned that shortly before the homicide, there were some conflicts.
Norma, she was upset at the fact that he would come make excuses to come over with the boys, but he would end up wanting to stay there. She used to complain about that. I said, don't let him in. He doesn't have the right to come into your house. And she was a little timid when it came down to Tony.
According to loved ones, Tony couldn't accept that Norma was moving on. Detectives press him about his whereabouts in the hours surrounding Norma's murder.
Tony said that on May the 30th, early afternoon, he talked with Norma and asked if their son Andrew could stay with him. Tony had tickets to an Angels game the next day, and so they agreed that that was okay.
Tony says Andrew was dropped back home the next night. At the time, Tony never entered the house. He found Norma's body the next day. Did Norma's ex innocently walk into the crime scene that morning, or had something more sinister happened?
The potential motive with him was he wanted the kids. Maybe one thing led to another, and he lost control.
In a room nearby, police questioned Tony's brother Hector, since he was with him when Norma's body was found. They asked where he and Tony went after dropping Norma's son at his mom's.
Hector, he said that they had been at his residence with other family members in the city of Oxnard. And when we interviewed those family members, they corroborated what Tony and Hector told us.
Knowing their alibis are far from concrete, detectives asked Tony and Hector to take polygraph tests.
The results of the tests were that they were being honest in stating that they did not know anything about the homicide.
With no hard evidence to hold them, investigators are forced to let the two men go. News of Norma's death quickly spreads through the small community.
When I found out about her being murdered like that, I had told my cousin that I had just talked to her. It can't be true because I just talked to her. It was true.
At the police station, detectives received the results of the autopsy.
The cause of death was established as manual strangulation. Norma wasn't a tiny woman. Whoever did this had to possess significant upper body strength.
Some important details emerge about the duct tape.
The length of it was approximately 20 feet and had been wrapped around her head about 14 times.
The duct tape was examined and there were skin cells that were discovered. But in 1993, DNA technology was in its infancy. You had to have a fairly significant sample size in order to potentially get a result from it. In Norma's case, they didn't have nearly enough in these samples.
To find out who did this, we have to dig deeper.
Searching for new leads, detectives hope Norma's 11-year-old son, Andrew, can help. With Tony's consent, the detectives talk with him at the station.
When you're interviewing any type of a witness, it's a difficult process. And you have to understand that when you're interviewing a child, it's extremely difficult. We interviewed Andrew, and we just wanted to try to get as much information as we could. From the date of the homicide, Andrew had gone to a baseball game with his father and his uncle. Later at night, Andrew was dropped off at the house, and the house was dark.
Andrew walked up to the front door, found it was locked. He went around to his bedroom, saw that the window was open, and crawled in.
Then, Andrew shares a disturbing detail told to him by his younger brother.
When Andrew came into the bedroom, 4-year-old Austin had said, "Mommy has a Band-Aid on her face." That didn't register immediately with Andrew, and so he went to bed. And it wasn't until morning that Andrew found out exactly what Austin meant by a Band-Aid. It just ripped at your heart knowing that a 4-year-old child had been just mere feet away from his mother being killed. And at one point he had come out, he had seen his mother's body. That just ripped at me a lot.
What else had Norma's youngest son, Austin, seen? Detectives decide to speak to the 4-year-old.
At first he was withdrawn. He really didn't want to talk about it, which was understandable. I knew that because he's 4 years old, and I couldn't have gone on much longer than I did. And I knew that I needed to stop. But then he mentioned a man by the name of Corey.
He brought up the name Corey as someone who was over at the house at that time. Now we've got this person who might end up being our prime suspect.
But who was Corey? Had he killed Norma? Did the single mom's youngest son just solve her murder?
We've got to run it down as far as it goes.
Police are investigating the bizarre murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez. Her youngest son, Austin, says he saw a man named Corey at their home around the time of the murder.
At that time, we had no idea who Corey was, but it was something that had to be checked out.
Detectives learn from the family that Corey could be Corey Davis, one of Norma's co-workers. So they head to her workplace.
First step was find out, to what extent Corey knew Norma, if they socialized, if they were friends away from work, and so forth.
Corey was more nervous than normal. In talking with him, he wouldn't look at us. He kept staring down, not tuning in or paying attention.
Corey's unusual behavior during their conversation alarms investigators.
He did not like being talked to and having to answer anything.
They question Corey about his relationship with Norma.
He stated that he would interact with Norma at work, but they weren't that close with each other, and they didn't have any interactions beyond that.
Detectives want to know if he was at Norma's house near the time of her murder, as young Austin claimed.
He made it pretty clear that he wasn't at the house at that time. Instead, he said the night of the homicide he was at home. The only people who were there at home with him were his parents. We needed to find out how much of what he was telling us was, provably true.
While officers are sent to check Corey's alibi, detectives speak to Norma's other coworkers, starting with her friend, Beatrice.
Beatrice came to Norma's house on Sunday, the day before the homicide. Norma had a get-together, a small barbecue at her house for several of her co-workers.
Police ask Beatrice if she remembers anything unusual about the day of the barbecue.
Beatrice said that while she was there, suddenly Norma can't find her keys anymore. And they ended up searching all over Norma's house, trying to figure out what happened to Norma's keys.
They didn't find them, and then they're laying beside her body, beside her house at the time she's found. We figured someone had taken her keys, and that's how they were able to enter the house.
It's a significant lead. Does this mean the killer stole the keys at Norma's barbecue? Detectives renew their focus on her inner circle.
From everything we knew, this was a pretty personal crime. We had a certain confidence that the killer knew Norma.
At the police station, investigators discover information they received from Corey Davis has some holes.
One of the things we do with everyone is we find out what their addresses are, their date of birth, everything else. And with Corey Davis, one of the things we noticed was that his address he gave us was not the address where he was actually living. So there was a discrepancy there.
Why would Corey withhold that information from detectives? They wonder what else he's hiding.
But at this point in time, Corey jumped out at us as this is the one we need to concentrate on.
Police bring Corey in for an interview, but he's far from helpful.
He's like, I don't want to be involved in this. Well, I understand that, but like it or not, you are part of this case. If you want to be eliminated from the suspect pool, the best way to do that is to cooperate with us.
Detectives share details of the crime with Corey to observe his reaction.
With the information that we were giving to him, he was obviously upset, and he took it really hard.
Corey denies any involvement in Norma's death. They ask him to take a polygraph test.
He submitted to the test, and he passed.
All detectives have tying Corey to the crime scene is a statement from Norma's 4-year-old son. But police know he could be mistaken, given his young age and traumatic experience.
At that point, Corey worked his way down the ladder of possible suspects dramatically.
1 week into the investigation, detectives are out of leads. They look at who else was at Norma's barbecue the day before she was killed. Friends tell them about a former coworker named Warren Mackey.
Warren Mackey was a previous co-worker of Norma's, and also he lived in fairly close proximity to her.
Warren and Norma hit it off and became friends.
They worked together for a while, and the work relationship became a social relationship. But it appeared that Warren had something more than just a friendship interest in Norma.
I remember Norma telling me that there was a guy there that she used to work with, and he was always trying to talk to her and trying to ask her out.
Talking to Norma's coworkers, detectives learned that Warren pursued Norma, but she wasn't interested in him romantically.
Norma told Beatrice and some of the other people that she felt that Warren wanted more than to be friends, and that she wasn't interested in that. She tried to curtail any attempts that he may have made to ask her out. Some of the employees that we talked with felt that Warren wasn't real pleased with that. He liked Norma, and that he wanted the relationship a little bit more than what it was.
But Norma still tried to maintain their friendship.
She noticed he was kind of like an outcast, just very private. So she tried to include him in the group. She didn't want to leave him out.
As detectives look closer at the quiet coworker, the information they uncover is concerning.
Started picking up little details about him at that point. There were some people who said, yeah, good guy, he was okay to work with. But there were enough people who pointed out that he was a little weird and had made some overtures to Norma, enough to make us want to look into this a little further.
But did Warren's workplace crush make him a killer?
The nature of the relationship was of interest to us. We're going to have a conversation with Warren Mackey.
Police investigating the murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez are questioning her former coworker, Warren Mackey. Detectives have learned that Warren may have been more than a doting colleague. They're trying to determine if he's connected to this brutal crime.
In our first encounter with Warren Mackey, there was nothing that seemed overtly suspicious or evasive or anything about him.
Detectives ask Warren about his feelings for Norma.
The impression that Warren Mackey gave us was that, his relationship with Norma Rodriguez was pretty casual. They didn't see quite as much of each other because they were no longer working with each other, but they socialized a lot.
Warren said that they were close, but it was only a close friendship. He never had romantic feelings for Norma.
He had tried to present himself to Norma as someone to lean on, someone to talk to. I'm here for you.
But investigators aren't fully buying it.
We felt that Warren liked Norma and that he wanted to make the relationship closer than it already was.
Then, Warren reveals a detail that grabs investigators' attention.
He had helped out Norma with, a couple little things around the house. And one of the things that he mentioned was that the kids had a small basketball hoop and it had somehow gotten broken and that he had fixed it. And what really kind of set off an alarm was the fact that he had fixed it with duct tape.
This is the first time in the investigation that anybody's mentioned duct tape or someone possessing duct tape.
Detectives drilled down on when Warren last saw Norma.
Warren said that he had been in the presence of Norma at the barbecue the day before the homicide. By the time things had wrapped up for the evening, it was essentially just him and Norma there, and they had just kicked back and watched TV for a while. This made him one of the last people who could have or would have seen Norma alive.
Had the former coworker made advances on Norma, then attacked her when she turned him down? Detectives ask where Warren was on the night of the murder.
Warren said that on May the 31st, close to Norma's homicide, he and his roommate and his roommate's girlfriend, they went to a nightclub in Santa Barbara till about 1:30, and then they came back to where they were living at in Oxnard. They talked for a short while, and then everybody went to bed. We drove to Oxnard, and we ended up talking with his roommate and her girlfriend who had gone with him for the night, and they corroborated his story as far as them going to Santa Barbara, closing the nightclub, and then getting back probably between 1:30 and 2 in the morning.
Could Warren have had time to drive to Port Hueneme and kill Norma after arriving home from a late night out with friends? Warren agrees to take a polygraph.
And he passed it, stating that he knew nothing about the homicide and he knew no one who would have killed her.
With nothing concrete tying him to the crime, police let Warren go. But before he leaves, Warren remembers Norma had problems with a man she was dating almost a year ago. named Daniel Garcia.
As the investigation continued, we started interviewing a number of people about Daniel. We found out that Daniel Garcia was Norma's boyfriend for a short period of time.
They met at a party. Norma had a strong attraction to the charming mechanic.
It was a brief but intense relationship, lasted a few months.
She told me about Daniel, that she really cared about him a lot. You know, they would do fun things together, and she always had a good time with him.
Friends tell police Daniel ended the relationship, blindsiding Norma.
Daniel had approached Norma and essentially told her that he wanted to go back with a former girlfriend. But Norma was affected quite a bit by the breakup.
Then, detectives learned that the relationship was turbulent.
There was some fraying in the relationship, and there were some conflicts. Now, that sends up some big red flags. There was one coworker who mentioned that they had witnessed a fairly heated argument between Norma and Daniel.
Daniel came in while she was working. For whatever reason it started, they had a verbal altercation that was witnessed by other people. It shows there was hostile feelings on the part of Daniel Garcia.
When detectives dig deeper into Daniel and Norma's relationship, they learn he visited Norma at home about 2 weeks before her murder.
Norma confided to her close friend she was involved with him before her death.
With a history of conflict in the relationship, did an argument turn deadly?
This is big. Any big fight that went on, that was problematic.
Detectives are closing in on their new suspect.
This could be our guy. We have to find out if he could have committed this crime.
The investigation into the murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez is heating up. Police have a new suspect in their sights, an ex-boyfriend, Daniel Garcia.
One of the things that we learned about the relationship between Daniel and Norma was that there were some conflicts. That sends up some red flags.
Daniel agrees to come to the police station for questioning.
Norma really had no confrontations. She was very mild-mannered. The fact that she was getting into verbal altercations was unusual.
When detectives ask Daniel about his relationship with Norma, he denies any problems.
Daniel said that he wanted to go back with a former girlfriend. And so they broke up and went their separate ways. But they were still able to be somewhat friends, and he would stop by on occasion.
Detectives confront him about the heated argument with Norma at her workplace almost a year earlier.
At the time, Norma learned that he had had other relationships, and it was a problem. She was pretty upset by that.
She still had feelings for Daniel.
Had Norma attempted to restart their relationship, but instead wound up in a fight that spiraled out of control.
During his interview, Daniel told us that he saw Norma but didn't have an argument.
Detectives asked Daniel where he was the night Norma was killed.
He stated that he was at home with other family members watching TV, and then he went to bed. We talked with other family members, and that alibi was corroborated, but family members will lie for other family members. Sometimes they won't be perfectly honest with what they know, and it's extremely difficult to put weight on that.
Like previous suspects, Daniel is subjected to a polygraph.
And he passed.
With no evidence connecting the ex-lover to the crime, police let him go. It's another disappointing dead end.
After a couple of weeks of going through this, talking to countless potential witnesses, countless potential suspects, neighborhood canvasses, interviews with co-workers, polygraph examinations, it was frustrating as hell.
That was really, really hard on my family. We did not have an answer to who killed Norma. I just wanted not only justice for Norma, I was very concerned for any woman out there We didn't know who it was. It could be someone that just passed me by. I didn't know. I just wanted him off the streets.
1 month into the investigation, the pressure continues to mount on police to solve the case.
We would get calls from the media every day. Every place we went in the community, they would ask us what was going on, you know, and it was a lot of pressure.
Then, a surprising development. Norma's family contacts police with new information about Beatrice, Norma's coworker and friend.
It turns out that Beatrice was having an affair, and she was using Norma's house as a location for these sexual liaisons. Norma knew about it and in fact condoned it and gave her a copy of her house key.
But why hadn't Beatrice disclosed this detail to police earlier?
We confronted Beatrice with this information. Initially, huge wave of embarrassment. But she laid it out on the line. She told us, you know, the when, the how many times.
Detectives question whether the secret rendezvous led to Norma's murder.
Now we've got other people who had, you know, either continued access to the house. Previously, they were on the periphery of this case. Now they've moved right to the center of it.
One person detectives immediately turn to is Beatrice's husband, who also knew Norma. Had he gone after Norma for helping his wife have a secret affair?
And now, suddenly, Beatrice's husband, he's potentially in the suspect pool. We have to find out if he has an alibi and if we can corroborate it.
He apparently didn't know his wife was having an extramarital affair in Norma's house.
That was not the most comfortable thing to do from an investigative standpoint, but it still had to be done. And, you know, the guy was crushed. He was absolutely crushed.
Detectives question Beatrice's husband about his whereabouts on the night of Norma's murder.
He told us that he had been at work late that evening. We talked to a lot of his coworkers. Everything about this man was genuine.
6 months into the investigation of the murder of Norma Rodriguez, detectives worry the trail has gone cold.
We're no closer to narrowing it down than we were on day one.
This case was very mind-boggling. You build up things that, wow, this is going to be great, it's coming together, and then it falls apart. As time progressed, the lead started falling off. It was tough. It was really tough.
Months turn to years. For nearly a decade, the case is at a standstill. But Norma's family doesn't give up.
Every year, we'd call the police department for any updates, any new leads or anything. We kept it active. We didn't want this case forgotten.
During this entire investigation, I had the picture of Norma Rodriguez on my desk. I swore to her that I would never give up trying to find out who was responsible.
Then, 10 years to the day Norma was killed. An astonishing break in the case.
Worker with a crime lab. He had a lot of the evidence that we secured in the Norma homicide. He called me and he says, we have a match. We have a match on the DNA.
My head just like exploded with 1,000 thoughts. It was just nuts.
I remember receiving the phone call and it was like winning the lottery.
It's been 10 years since 32-year-old Norma Rodriguez was found in her home, strangled and wrapped in duct tape. The case has remained unsolved, with all leads turning out to be dead ends, until now. With advancements in DNA technology, evidence collected a decade ago has finally yielded results.
At the time of the autopsy of Norma Rodriguez, there were a number of samples that were taken. Hair samples, blood samples, and fingernail clippings.
The crime lab said we have a match on the DNA, and it comes back to Warren Mackey.
Warren, Norma's friend and former coworker who had previously passed a polygraph and had an alibi for the night of the murder. At the time of the investigation, Warren had submitted his DNA and was cooperative.
Of everyone we dealt with, he was maybe the coolest customer of the bunch. It just blows you away.
Investigators start putting the pieces together about Warren Mackey.
If you're dealing with someone who's a true sociopath, they can get past the polygraph test. So now I'm thinking, all this time, were we dealing with a true sociopath and, couldn't see it?
We just went into high gear. We started unraveling everything again and doing what we needed to do.
Detectives start building a case based on forensics.
They evaluated DNA that we had gotten off of Norma's body, and we found Warren's DNA under Norma's fingernails.
The DNA evidence is a major breakthrough, but to build an airtight case, they want more.
The single biggest piece of physical evidence we had at the time was the duct tape. So it got sent off and it got tested.
The DNA that was obtained within the multiple layers of the duct tape was returned to Warren Mackey.
The odds of the DNA match being from someone else besides Warren Mackey was 1 in 810 billion. So we felt pretty confident that this was our person.
Investigators pieced together the events that led up to Norma's murder.
I think this was the classic case of a jilted suitor. And my guess is that he just got a flat-out rejection. He built up his expectations to a point where he couldn't take the fall.
Investigators believe in the early hours of May 31st, Warren Mackey entered Norma's home using keys he had stolen from her purse at the barbecue the day before.
According to Norma's son, Andrew, the house was dark. Many times she would fall asleep watching TV. Maybe she fell asleep on the couch. She had no idea what was about to happen.
Detectives believe that's when Warren strangled Norma.
In his mind, she needed to die because she shouldn't have rejected him.
Then Warren wrapped her head in duct tape.
Trying to depersonalize the scene and covered her face so that he wouldn't see it.
And he ripped that duct tape, handling both ends of the duct tape, wrapped it completely around her face, and left.
Police also believe Norma's 4-year-old son, Austin, was in the next room, not realizing his mother had been murdered.
Austin didn't process because he was a very small child. He was too young to process what had happened. An absolute nightmare.
After Warren kills Norma, he returns to his place in nearby Oxnard as if nothing happened.
I believe that Warren Mackey was the type of person who felt that if I can't have her, nobody can. I think this was one sick individual who had no value for life. He had no right to do what he did.
On August 28, 2003, Ventura County investigators arrest Warren Mackey for the first-degree murder of Norma Rodriguez. Warren pleads not guilty.
During the subsequent 10 years, Warren had settled down. He had gotten married, had a job, was living a very stable life. His friends, neighbors said that he was a nice, caring man.
And for him to live 10 years after that and not even have any remorse, that is not human. I can't imagine what is in a person's head to even hurt another human in that way.
Then, on January 10, 2005, as investigators prepare for trial, the DA receives an unexpected call. Warren Mackey has changed his plea to guilty.
Warren Mackey is an unexpected killer because people didn't see that inner demon, that selfishness, that narcissistic quality that would cause him to end someone else's life. People just didn't see him that way, but he was that way, and he is that way.
On March 28, 2005, Warren Mackey is sentenced to 15 years to life for the murder of Norma Rodriguez.
Oh, it was phenomenal. It was such an elation. You felt like this weight being lifted.
At the end of the day, we achieved closure for the family, but there's never going to be complete closure.
The devastating loss of the vibrant single mother will forever be felt by her loved ones.
I think about Norma a lot. She was having a good life, and he took it away from her.
It still hurts like it happened yesterday. I miss her in my life. That wound does not heal. We just put it in the back burner. We have to live for Norma, and we have to go forward.
A loving husband and father with so much to live for.
He did everything for his family. He was an amazing daddy. He loved life. He loved to be happy.
Is ruthlessly gunned down at home in front of his wife.
When he was laying there on the floor, nothing can prepare you for that.
They stood over the victim's body with a shotgun and delivered a fatal blow.
This wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination.
Police tracked down several suspects.
She was absolutely the possible person who was involved. She had all the motive.
He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence.
And we knew that he and the victim had some bad blood between them.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer,
we were pretty frustrated, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
The case takes a mind-blowing turn.
She sang like a songbird.
He had been in possession of the guns used.
And law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
To reveal a killer no one imagined.
This is unbelievable.
It was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
The darkest, blackest soul.
Known for its white sand beaches, Panama City lies on the Gulf Coast of Florida's Panhandle.
Our biggest industry is tourism, with millions of people coming to enjoy the Gulf Coast.
The community is very tight. You know most of your neighbors, you know everybody that you do business with on a personal name basis.
But in the early hours of October 6, 1998, the town's sense of safety is rocked by a chilling 911 call.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a call from a woman that her husband had been shot and killed.
There was a lot of shots. I ran back to the bedroom. The killer wasn't in the house. He was coming after us. I literally thought everybody was gonna die, and I was so scared.
Police raced to the home, expecting to encounter an active shooter.
Their first thought is clearing that house, making sure that the killer's not still in the house.
As the officer entered, the first thing that he noticed was the victim's body in the kitchen area.
When they started calling out that they were the police and they were there, the wife was in a bedroom.
She had retreated to seek safety for her and her children, which were still in the house.
This is all just happening so quickly. I don't know how I'm supposed to trust that whoever's out there is not the killer.
Officers find no sign of the gunman and assure Angelica it's safe to come out of the bedroom.
The wife came out and she was very, very hysterical.
When they walked me back out, when he was laying there on the floor, I knew he was gone. You have somebody murdering your husband and shooting you, all in seconds. Nothing can prepare you for that.
Angelica identifies the man as her husband, 30-year-old Ron Stovall.
The children were taken to Ron's parents' house. They didn't live too far away. And the victim's wife went to the police department where we could talk to her.
With Angelica and the children out of harm's way, detectives can examine the crime scene.
As a responding detective, I go in and start looking around. Ron, the victim, he had been shot 3 times in the back, once in the hip, and there was a shot to the back of the head.
Investigators find an important clue close to the victim's body.
There were some bloody footprints there on the floor. Part of those footprints had what looked like the letter H, 2 H's kind of next to each other on the sole.
Whoever was wearing that shoe had perpetrated at least part of the crime because they would have been standing in the victim's blood and then exiting the residence following the homicide.
The Stovall's front door also reveals how the murder unfolded.
We could see her husband was shot outside, and then the killer shot through the door, and he got into the house, and he had shot Ron in the back of the head.
As daylight breaks, a forensic team scours the outside of the home.
They found a handgun projectile out on the sidewalk near the driveway.
The killer shot what it clearly looks like a handgun round to the lower extremities, and then you have a shotgun round to the head. This was overkill. They stood over the body and delivered a fatal blow. When you see that type of crime scene, you're looking immediately for someone that displayed some type of grudge or emotional hatred for the victim.
While forensics wrap up their investigation at the crime scene, detectives head to the police station to speak with Ron's wife, Angelica.
We really took note how emotionally overtaken she was. But she had been an eyewitness to this scene, so she was critical in our investigation.
I can't even comprehend what's going on. He was dead. I did not want to live without him. Ron was truly amazing. He was always full of life, very kind, sincere, very real.
Born in Panama City, Ron Stovall was one of 4 siblings.
He was very close with his family. He was always out doing stuff with school, doing stuff with the church.
He was well known within the community.
Ron served almost 4 years in the Navy. He had felt a commitment to his country and enjoyed his naval service.
Ron always dreamt of having a family, and in 1989, he met his first wife, Tina Trexler.
Tina and Ron got married, and they had 1 child, they had a daughter.
The marriage was a rocky one, and after 6 years, it fell apart. Soon after, Ron met single mom Angelica at a local beach bar.
He said he knew from the second he saw me that he loved me. Our first night, we went on a date, took me to the beach, to the ocean, put out a blanket, listened to some Marvin Gaye, had Italian food. It was very romantic. He stole my heart, and I was never in love before. I just fell right into his arms.
In 1997, the couple married. Just like Ron, Angelica had a child from a previous relationship. A year later, their family of 4 became 5 when they had a daughter of their own.
Ron took on several jobs. He worked as a waiter. He worked as a delivery man for the UPS companies.
He was very dedicated, and he just got his massage therapy license. He did everything for his family. We were very happy.
Who would want to gun down this loving husband and father in cold blood? At the station, Angelica tells police how the murder unfolded.
I was able to tell the cops everything I knew, and I didn't try to hold anything back. Ron got up at about 3 o'clock every morning, and I would get up and make his lunch for him to take to work.
She explains how Ron left the house and was suddenly ambushed.
There were some shots. I didn't know what was going on. He collapsed on the ground, and the killer tried coming through the door, so I was fighting with him. He got his hand through it, grabbed the gun, and he opened the door with his hand, and I looked down that barrel of that silver gun, and he shot it.
The bullet just misses Angelica.
I ran back to the bedroom.
As Angelica shares more details about the deadly attack, detectives gain important information about the killer.
She described him as male, brown eyes, brown hair, and that he had some type of facial hair, possibly a mustache. She indicated hearing the assailant say to Ron as he was delivering the fatal gunshot wound, "This is for her."
It sounded very evil.
Angelica tells police she doesn't know the meaning behind the killer's words.
We need to find out who her was, and we needed to find out what made this so personal to her.
Well, this wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination, is what it was.
Investigators ask Angelica who might want Ron dead.
Immediately, she went to Tina, his ex-wife. Ms. Stovall indicated that the relationship between Ron and his ex-wife was volatile. There was a custody issue over their daughter.
Things got a little bit more sticky with the custody setup, and Ron was filing for full custody of the child.
Could the bitter custody battle have turned deadly?
This was an enormous red flag for us as a team. Whoever her was may have in fact had to do with his ex-wife.
It's probably one of the worst situations we ever deal with, is with the man and woman and children involved. It will just about make a person do anything.
Coming up, police uncover a key piece of evidence.
He brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene,
leading to a disturbing plot.
The photo identification that made him a prime suspect.
It was his eyes. What I saw was the same person.
And a sickening betrayal no one saw coming.
They planned this whole thing.
None of us had ever worked a case like this.
I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred.
Police investigating the cold-blooded shooting of 30-year-old Ron Stovall are looking into his relationship with his ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
We knew that there was an extreme amount of tension between Ron and his ex-wife, and there was a custody battle that was forthcoming.
Ron and Tina originally shared custody, but Ron had filed a petition basically saying that he wanted full custody of the child.
Up to this point, Tina was that individual that had the most to gain from Ron's death. Perhaps she had not been the one on scene, but it still doesn't eliminate her as having some type of involvement.
This looked like certainly an intentional and a premeditated killing. Might have been a killing for hire.
Detectives speak to Ron's friends and family to get a clearer picture of the animosity with Tina.
When Ron remarried, it was okay, but not really okay. Tina, as well as her family, did not like the new wife, and the situation deteriorated between all of them.
As Ron and Angelica's family grew, Tina's behavior appeared increasingly erratic.
Tina began feeling that Ron was trying to work Tina out of the picture as the mother, and so that had really kind of amplified the rub and the tension.
There was all this, crazy fighting, and it was too hard for his daughter. We were just concerned.
This custody hearing was coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks from when this incident happened.
Tina was absolutely a possible person who was involved in this murder. She had all the motive.
Could the custody battle have driven Ron's ex-wife to murder? Investigators bring Tina in for an interview.
One of the things that was most alarming when we sat down with Tina was that there was no remorse, no emotional activity on her part, that she was even concerned that he was dead.
When investigators ask about her relationship with Ron, Tina's answer is surprising.
We knew there were a lot of hostilities, but when Tina was interviewed, she kind of painted that the relationship with them was cordial, it was friendly. It's a red flag for us as investigators because she's already showing signs of deceit.
With suspicions raised, detectives grilled Tina about her whereabouts in the hours leading up to Ron's murder.
She told us the night before the homicide, she had went to work at a local restaurant. She was a bartender. She got off sometime between 11 and midnight. She had went home. and sat and watched TV with her mother. Then after that, she had went to bed, and at the time of the homicide itself, she had been home asleep.
Before police can press Tina further, the interview is interrupted.
Her mother had hired a lawyer for her.
The attorney made contact with Tina and immediately ended the interview.
Unable to finish questioning Tina, detectives look into her alibi.
Police were able to establish that she had been at work that night till 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Investigators also speak with Tina's mother, Ann Trexler.
She was the grandmotherly type and was helping Tina get back on her feet and help her get through this divorce.
And come across as a very down-to-earth, nice lady, a housewife, and she confirmed that Tina had been at the house with her watching TV.
Though Tina's alibi checks out, police still theorize that she could have hired someone to kill her ex-husband.
We conducted a preliminary investigation into her financial records. Everything was consistent with that of just a working-class individual making normal purchases.
1 week into the investigation with no concrete evidence pointing at Tina, police look for other suspects. They quickly discover Tina wasn't the only one in a dispute with Ron.
Tina had a boyfriend. His name was Adrian Harris, and there had been some confrontations between Ron and Mr. Harris regarding the way Ron was treating Tina. And in fact, at one point, there had been some threats made on Harris's part.
Had Adrian decided to confront Ron, leading to deadly consequences.
As we began looking into Mr. Harris, whether he was paid to do it or whether he did it on his own, we weren't sure, but the concern was that he may have perpetrated this to make good with Tina for the purpose of helping her.
Investigators tracked down Adrian over 900 miles away near Baltimore.
When we talked with Adrian, he did acknowledge that there was some bad blood between the two of them, but he really kind of downplayed the significance.
The day of the murder, he told us he went to work.
He had clocked in before 7:30, and the time of Ron's death was 3:30 in the morning.
Detectives checked travel times between Baltimore and Panama City.
There was not enough time to get to Panama City from several states away to do the murder and go back home.
While Adrian is ruled out, someone close by catches the investigators' attention.
We talked to his roommate, Guy McInvale.
When the officers went to talk to Adrian's roommate, they discovered the description of the killer that Angelica gave to law enforcement. The roommate fitted quite well.
Guy McInvale had brown eyes, brown hair, and he had a mustache. Now we had another individual that we want to look at.
Once we saw him, Guy fit the description. He was a roommate with Adrian Harris, and we knew that Harris and the victim had some bad blood between them. We thought maybe he went there to kill him.
Is this the break police have been hoping for? Investigators rush to confirm if Guy is a true match for the gunman.
We got pictures of him to show the victim's wife, Angelica. See if he could have been the one that she saw that night.
Back in Panama City, detectives include the picture of Guy into a photo lineup.
Angelica was an essential witness.
She was a witness who can identify the individual that did the crime. Her photographic identification, it was surprising.
It has been 2 weeks since 30-year-old father, Ron Stovall, was shot to death at home in front of his wife, Angelica. Now, detectives hope she can identify the shooter from a photo lineup.
She picked out Guy McInvale as being the killer.
It was his eyes. There was something very, very similar. What I saw was the same person.
There was an identification of Guy McInvale that made him a prime suspect.
We have Miss Stovall's positive identification of Guy as the individual that was in front of their house. There's a sense of relief that begins to sweep through the unit because you're finally on to a really developing hot lead. We want to now try to establish what type of physical evidence do we actually have between the victim, Ron, and Guy.
Detectives get a search warrant and race over to Guy's Baltimore residence. They make a telling discovery.
We search his items, and looking at me right square in the face was a pair of shoes consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. So we're moving in the right direction.
Police bring Guy to the local police station for questioning.
Although we still were missing the key pieces of evidence, the guns and such as that, we really felt like we're starting to put together the edges of the puzzle. In speaking with Guy, what he provided us for an alibi was that he was in Maryland working. At the end of work, he went home, slept. The next day he got up, went to work, and so that was his alibi.
Detectives check out Guy's story.
We had an opportunity to speak with Guy at his place of employment, and we were able to collect some video that correlated with his timeline of what he said. There was physically no way possible for him to have been here in Panama City at the time of the crime.
It turned out that what Guy McIngvale said to the police was correct. Guy had an alibi.
Eager to further prove his innocence, Guy volunteers to take a polygraph.
He successfully passed that. So we were able to clear Mr. McIngvale.
For police, it's a disappointing setback.
We were pretty frustrated, and it's a roller coaster. It's one of those, now you're back in the lows again, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
Angelica wanted to help the officers along, but her perception at the time of the event was clouded by the terror, the trauma of the incident itself.
I remember him being the same person. It stuck in my head like that, but I was wrong.
It's difficult when you see something that quick that you can say, okay, this is the individual that did the crime.
We thought we had this thing solved, but you just got to go regroup, see what you still have to do, and you just start from there.
Desperate for new leads, investigators review Ron's autopsy report.
The autopsy confirmed 2 different weapons. They told us that it was a .357 round that he had been shot with, plus the shotgun shell. One big thing we learned was that shotgun residue got in his face. We think that Ron was laying there on the floor, and this guy's saying this is for her, and he presses that shotgun to the back of his head, and Ron's looking at him when that went off.
The forensics report contains another crucial detail that could lead police to the killer.
These were close proximity rounds, and so we knew that this was something personal, and the shotgun shell was paramount. It was a unique round. We would be able to identify it. So that was a plus in our corner.
Detectives shared details of the firearms with local law enforcement, hoping to track down their owner.
We work so closely with the different police departments in the area. We talk to them all the time in case something turns up.
As investigators continue to search for answers, Ron's loved ones struggle with their grief.
The best thing in my life was that life. I didn't think I was strong enough to go through anything without him. He was always full of life. Losing your soulmate, you can't even explain how much pain that was. It still is. It'll never go away.
3 weeks after Ron's murder, the investigation is threatening to grow cold, but then police receive a tip that reignites the case.
We got a call from the Panama City Beach Police Department. They had a home invasion out there on the beach. During that arrest, they recovered 2 handguns and a short-barreled shotgun.
They knew from the investigation of the crime scene where Ron Stovall was killed that a shotgun had been used and that a handgun had been used.
That coincides with what we're looking for. We wanted to go over the evidence they had and the circumstances.
Could these be the weapons connected to Ron's murder?
The gentleman that they arrested, we started looking into him and looking at his background and everything. And he had a pretty lengthy criminal history, had actually been linked to some murders in the past. He really caught our attention. This turned out to be a big break.
Police in Panama City are investigating the cold-blooded homicide of husband and father, Ron Stovall. They now believe the missing murder weapons were used in a home invasion robbery less than 15 miles away.
When meeting with this investigator from the Beach Police Department, what he produced from his crime scene was this: a handgun and a sawed-off shotgun. That coincides with what we're looking for. Then he brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene. We have everything that meets the parameters. Now we really believe we're on the right path.
The weapons are sent off to the crime lab. While detectives await the results, they dig deeper into this new lead.
At the Beach Police Department, they identified the individual as Tony Alberto Perez. He went by Tony. He had an extensive criminal history. There was some acts of violence in his past, or some drugs in his past. They really felt like he was a pretty violent individual.
Another detail catches their attention.
Tony had brown eyes, brown hair, and facial hair. He looks just like our guy. He met Miss Stovall's physical description to a T.
Investigators head to the nearby jail where Tony is being held for the home invasion.
He come across as a kind of a likable guy. He was laughing and cutting up, but the more he talked, the more red flags went up. He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence. He was completely nonchalant about it.
Detectives turn up the heat and ask Tony if he killed Ron Stovall.
Tony totally denied any involvement, any knowledge of Ron, any knowledge of anything that may have happened on that date, and basically told law enforcement, it's not me, I'm not the person.
Despite Tony's denials, investigators believe he's withholding information, and they obtain a search warrant.
Tony Perez had items that he owned stored at the landlord's house, and we're searching through Tony Perez's items over there. And then we find a pair of work boot type shoes.
While inspecting the footwear, detectives notice a key detail.
Those work boots had what looked like the letter H, two H's kind of next to each other on the sole. It looked like what we had found at the crime scene. And we got those sent right off to the lab.
As police hunt for more incriminating evidence against Tony, the ballistic results come back.
And we actually got confirmation from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that the guns collected that Tony had been in possession of matched perfectly ballistically to the rounds that we had recovered from our scene.
That evidence right there is one of the biggest things you could have in any murder case. You can find the weapons and find a person who has the weapons. That's major.
So now that we can put Tony, or at least the guns, at the scene, that gave us the ability to change gears with Tony. We had the information and ammunition that we needed to confront Tony about what really happened.
Detectives head back to the jail to interview their prime suspect.
As Tony began to kind of spin his version of what happened to Ron, now he acknowledged having a little knowledge of it, but he said that he had loaned his guns to someone else and that he didn't know what they did with them. He didn't have any involvement in it. But what he says is that he had heard Ron was dealing drugs, and that's why he was killed.
We had already done a thorough background on Ron. We knew Ron was not involved in any drug business. We had talked to too many people. He was a happily married man trying to make it in life. That's what Ron was.
Then Tony gave us information that would kind of put us on some individuals that might be involved, and we tracked those individuals down, and we were able to confirm 100% that they had nothing to do with Ron's death.
People sometimes, when they are being questioned, especially when the police have some of the goods on them, will make up stories, and that's what Perez did. As far as the police could determine, that was a total concoction by Tony Perez.
Detectives believe Tony is lying, but wonder what motive he could have to kill Ron.
We were still kind of struggling to establish how Tony would have came into Ron's life.
Going through Tony's belongings, we found some cell phone bills there, and they were linked to the name of Kim Miller. Kim Miller turned out to be Tony's girlfriend. So we went to talk to Kim.
Kim Miller is the owner of a Panama City hair salon.
Tony and Kimberly, they had been in a romantic relationship for several months.
We were told by Kim that Tony, he was doing odd things for her. He would come around the hair salon and he would actually shampoo customers' hair, clean up, sweep up the shop, things like that.
Investigators look for a connection between Tony and Ron Stovall.
Kim was familiar with the Stovall homicide. She claims that she first heard about it because she had a customer that had called in and canceled her hair appointment, saying how her ex-son-in-law had been murdered.
When detectives ask Kim for the customer's name, they receive a startling response.
The connection kind of came out of nowhere and almost as a surprise.
Kim's client is Ann Trexler, who happens to be Tina's mother. Tina, Ron's ex-wife.
Police believe husband and father Ron Stovall was shot and killed by criminal Tony Perez. They're now exploring a potential link between Tony and Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
When Kim Miller indicated that she styled Tina's mother, Ann Trexler's hair, and law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
Ann Trexler is the mother of Ron's ex-wife, Tina.
We knew of the ongoing hostilities between Ron and Tina. So when we talked with Kim Miller, we asked her if she had ever met Tina, his ex-wife, and she did met her on a couple of occasions. Tina's mother, Ann, however, was a regular client, was in there on a regular basis.
With Tina previously eliminated from the investigation, detectives asked Kim more about Tina's mother, 52-year-old Ann Trexler.
She told us that Ann's talking to her and telling her about these problems with her daughter going through this custody battle with her ex-husband. And she was upset about it. She's afraid she's going to lose her grandchild.
Ann had told Kimberly the Trexlers had to get a second mortgage on their home to provide legal assistance to Tina.
Could the custody battle be the motive behind Ron's murder?
At that point, we were trying to determine exactly who she was. She hadn't really been on our radar at all. We knew that she was Tina's mom. We knew that she was Tina's alibi at the time of this crime.
Ann Trexler, no criminal history, supposedly a wonderful grandmother and fine Christian lady who would never be involved in something like this.
Investigators contact Ron's wife, Angelica, and learn his custody dispute with Tina brought out a different side to his former mother-in-law.
Apparently they had a good relationship when Tina and them were married, but it was just a constant battle over visitation rights. Always just such a fight with her.
Looking to see if Ann could have anything to do with Ron's murder, detectives bring her in for an interview.
When we talked to her, she stated to us that there was no way that she had anything to do with killing him. She did not want him dead. Matter of fact, she said she loved him. And then Ann Trexler wanted a lawyer. And once they get a lawyer, you're done talking.
So we're kind of getting a heightened sense of concern as far as her involvement in the case because she decided to basically not cooperate with the investigation.
Having hit a wall with Ann, detectives get a breakthrough when forensics results arrive.
We got confirmation that Tony's boot was consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. Also, Tony had been in possession of the guns used. Now you've got a personal item putting him at the crime scene. At that point, we knew we had our shooter.
That's a big piece of evidence right there.
We were able to go back to Tony and present him with what we knew.
He admitted killing Ron. His very words were, "Okay, I did it." It's the shortest confession to a murder I've ever taken in my career.
Investigators push Tony to reveal how the crime unfolded, and what he tells them is shocking.
Tony told us that Ann Trexler wanted to have her ex-son-in-law killed and was willing to pay to have it done. When we found out Ann Trexler wanted to hire somebody to kill Ron, I mean, this is unbelievable. Ex-mother-in-law? gonna get involved and have pay somebody to kill her ex-son-in-law?
He had met Ann at the hair salon. She was complaining about Ron and that the two of them had worked out a deal for Tony to kill Ron in exchange for about $10,000 to be paid to Tony.
On November 10, 1998, Tony is charged with the first-degree murder of Ron Stovall. But the case is far from over. Detectives turn their attention back to alleged mastermind Ann Trexler. Searching for answers, detectives pull Ann's phone records.
The phone records were a treasure trove of information. They showed a lot of phone traffic between Kim Miller and Antonio Perez and Ann Trexler.
It clearly looks like Kimberly was the middle person between Ann and Tony.
There were phone calls between the Trexler house and Kim Miller at strange hours of the night for strange amounts of time that could not be explained away by saying, we're setting up our rinse and set. Another thing, we were able to show that Ann Trexler received a phone call from Kim Miller the morning right after Ron's death. So there were links to tie Ann Trexler to this plot, but there was no hard, concrete connection of evidentiary value. We needed something else that would show that Ann, in fact, had hired Antonio Perez to kill Ron Stovall.
Tony Perez, he says that he had come to an agreement with Ann Trexler to kill Ron for $10,000.
Detectives scour Ann's financial records for any signs she had commissioned Ron's murder.
We have withdrawals from her bank accounts that coincide with when Tony says he was paid and the amount that he was paid. So now we have proof that what Tony's telling us is accurate regarding being paid. With regards to Ann, none of us had ever worked a case like this. So it was kind of a shock that all of these pieces were kind of lining up to support she is the motivation to this entire crime.
But we felt like we still could not make the case against Ann Trexler. We needed someone to corroborate what Tony Perez said. We needed somebody else that can draw the line between the money and the murder of Ron Stovall.
We have to go back to the middleman in the case, which is Kim Miller.
She's the whole key to this thing.
She was looking at criminal charges, but without her, we're not going to get Ann. She is the only way that we're going to have true accounts of what happened.
We went and picked up Kim Miller and brought her in.
Kim Miller, she stonewalled. She said, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm not telling you anything.
Investigators working the Ron Stovall homicide have charged shooter Tony Perez with murder and believe the mastermind is Ron's former mother-in-law, Ann Trexler. But to build an ironclad case, they need Tony's girlfriend and go-between, Kim Miller, to share what she knows. However, Kim is refusing to talk.
It really wasn't until we actually laid out in front of her the phone records and drew the lines between Ann and her and Tony that we were able to convince her to cooperate with the investigation.
We let her know, she was going to be charged with accessory to the murder, and she's facing life in prison.
Prosecutors offer Kim a deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against Ann Trexler. Eventually, Kim takes the deal.
Kim sang like a songbird.
Kimberly was very adamant that there was a deep-seated hatred for Ron on Ann Trexler's part.
She indicated that on many occasions, Ann Trexler ranted and raved about Ron Stovall, how bad he was, that he was going to remove her granddaughter. She wished that somebody would take him out, and it got more and more. Finally, Kim said, okay, if you're really serious, I know somebody who might help you.
Kim lets her know that her boyfriend, Tony Perez, will get rid of him for $10,000. That's how the deal came about.
Kim then reveals how in the early hours of October 6th, Tony drove to the Stovall house to lie in wait for Ron.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, When Ron went out to his vehicle, Tony took a shot at him with a pistol. And Ron ran inside and slammed the door behind him, and Tony Perez fired more shots, which struck Ron in the back.
To finish Ron off, Tony tried to force his way inside the house.
Angelica, she tried to hold the door, and Tony Perez fired a shot that almost struck her. She ran to the other room to call 911.
Tony Perez came in, and he found Ron on the floor and walked up with a shotgun, said, "This is for her." Boom. He killed Ron Stovall right there.
When he made the statement, "This is for her," it's our belief that Tony was doing this on Ann's behalf.
Tony came there to do one thing, and that was to kill Ron Stovall.
Once he had made his getaway, he was able to reach out to Kimberly and make notice to her that, in fact, the job had been done. And then, of course, she notified Ann.
Kim swears Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler, wasn't involved in their murderous plan.
Law enforcement looked at Tina Trexler. Her mother, Ann, may have confided in her, but no one could get to that much evidence to put Tina in the situation of taking Ron's life.
Ann Trexler, she tried to be the grandmotherly type, but she planned this whole thing.
Ann Trexler's thought pattern was Ron Stovall is getting ready to take my only precious granddaughter away from me, and I won't have visitation, and he left my daughter, he married somebody else. He should not be able to get away with this.
From an investigator's perspective, Ann carried just as much weight as Tony. Without Ann, Tony would not have even known who Ron Stovall was.
On February 15th, 2000, Ann Trexler is formally charged with the murder of her former son-in-law, Ron Stovall.
Then the cops called and he said, "Got her, she's in jail." She is morbidly evil. The darkest, blackest soul ever. And then she'll put on a face like she's just Miss Innocent. The killer, he didn't know Ron. Ann knew Ron. I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred in their body, in their mind, in their heart.
In court, shooter Tony Perez pleads guilty and is sentenced to life without parole. In February 2000, Kim Miller is sentenced to 5 years probation as part of her deal with prosecutors. Finally, in 2001, Ann's trial begins, and she pleads not guilty.
Ann Trexler took the stand. She testified about not being involved. She testified about her concerns of her grandchild and the fact that she had absolutely no involvement.
On May 14th, 2001, the jury finds Ann Trexler guilty of first-degree murder. She's sentenced to life in prison without parole.
There's a little piece. I'm in a little piece in this horrible thing. A little justice, I guess.
Gets a little emotional sometimes. It's not just me. You know, we're a whole team working this thing. We celebrated, I'll just say that. We celebrated this one.
The most striking thing to me is that these are all ordinary people. And it's a little bit frightening to think that people who are walking around living everyday ordinary lives would be capable of this.
The one that initiated it all was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
For Ron's family, his loss continues to be deeply felt.
I miss him and I love him so much. My poor daughter, she never got the honor she deserved. She never got her daddy. We celebrate his life all the time. He loved life. He loved to be happy. And I've tried so hard to keep his memory alive. Very much so. I will never forget how amazing Ron was.